In the western lands of Mahidor, the Eshrashar Empire began conquering neighboring kingdoms following Cardion's coronation. Amidst all this war, there was a mercenary who preferred to hide his own past because those memories had left a deep mark on him. It all started a long time ago, when the Prota got the news that he had to get married. He asks what his father means by that, and his dad replies that his partner will be the young lady of House Wibben. He explains that she is 16, very pretty, sweet, and enjoys gardening. Man, I want a wife too, lucky jerk of a Prota. After that, his father leaves the room. He remembers his dad saying she'd be a good wife, sighing that, at only 14, he's marrying someone he's never seen. Hey, if she's pretty, it's all good. Enjoy it, bro. He gets anxious thinking about how such a big decision could happen so suddenly. Surprised by the whole thing, he can't believe he's actually getting married. Elric couldn't make sense of his father's words, as that sudden marriage made no sense to him at all. His biggest question was why such a proud noblewoman would agree to something like this. He couldn't understand why she'd marry someone from a simple merchant family like his. She's pretty and noble. No need to overthink it, my friend. On the day of their meeting, the young lady approaches dressed as a bride and says it's a great pleasure to meet him. Looking at her, the boy falls head over heels in love. She then introduces herself formally as Tyria Wibben. The boy notices her blonde hair and her gentle light green eyes, which look like fresh little sprouts. He notices her very fair skin and her red lips, bright like cherries. For the young man, the only way to describe her at that moment was as someone extremely mysterious and elegant. The young man is snapped out of his thoughts when they tell him to greet her, making him stutter out of embarrassment. Feeling very awkward, Elric bows slightly and stutters that it's a pleasure to meet her too. Although he was very confused by the situation, a very clear thought crossed his mind at that moment. Now that they were married, he realizes he'll spend the rest of his life by her side. Looking back, the young man realizes that warm feeling was his very first true love. Whoever drops a comment and a like will find true love too. Shy and unable to stop smiling, he tries to hide his red face as they exchange rings. He even puts on a serious, stern expression just to hold back the silly grin that wanted to break out. The problem was that, without realizing it, his attitude ended up creating a huge misunderstanding. Elric had no idea how much his serious face would deeply hurt her feelings. The scene shifts to a very rainy and dark night outside a large, luxurious mansion. Inside one of the rooms, a single lit candle quietly illuminates the space. Elric looks at the ring on his finger and thinks that, despite it being a very sudden marriage, such an elegant and refined person was now officially his wife, which made him very happy. He recalls once more the moment his father revealed his bride was the young lady of House Wibben. The young man gives a soft smile, thinking about how lucky he was to marry someone so amazing. However, no matter how much he tries to analyze the situation from every angle, it all seemed way too strange. He then asks the maid why a noblewoman like Tyria would agree to marry a merchant's son. The maid hesitates completely, not knowing what to say. Clearly showing her nervousness, he pushes on and asks Rhonda to tell him the truth, since she surely knows all the details. The woman remains silent for a few moments, visibly uncomfortable with that question. Suddenly, she reveals that it's nothing more than an arranged marriage, leaving the young man completely shocked. She explains that House Wibben used to be very wealthy, but went bankrupt, and in exchange for having their massive debts paid off, his family offered all necessary financial support and demanded that this marriage happen. Rhonda says that with this, their merchant family, House Portman, finally managed to enter the nobility. Elric asks if that means she was basically sold to them, and the maid just stays silent. The young man is completely devastated upon realizing the cruel reality behind his dream marriage. Panic-stricken, he frantically begins to wonder what on earth he just did to her life. Desperate, he runs out of there while the maid shouts worriedly, calling for the young master. The only thing going through Elric's mind at that moment was that he desperately needed to explain himself. He runs as fast as he can through the mansion's hallways, with the sole desire to ask for her forgiveness. The young man desperately wanted to find any excuse he could give to ease that situation. He stops halfway, leaning his hand against the wall as he tries to catch his breath from running. Tired, and with his heart racing, the boy leans on the wall, utterly exhausted both physically and mentally. He keeps panting, trying to calm down while thoughts spin endlessly in his head. Reaching the large doors of his new wife's room, he hesitantly reaches his hand out to the doorknob. Before entering, the young man hears a soft weeping sound coming from inside the room and stops in surprise. He carefully opens the door just a crack, confirming that someone is indeed crying heavily in there. Looking inside, he sees the young blonde girl with a bright red face crying quietly. Tyria was curled up, hugging her knees in the middle of the room as she shed her tears of pain. Seeing that scene breaks Elric's heart, leaving him paralyzed and unsure of how to react to her suffering. The moment he saw her in that miserable state, the young man made a drastic decision and stepped back. He decided right then and there that he would do whatever it takes to cancel that forced marriage and set her free. The scene cuts to his father, who remains focused, writing important documents at his desk. The silence of the room is broken by fast, determined footsteps approaching the large wooden door. Elric throws the door open all at once with all his strength and shouts for his father, surprising the man with his outburst. Without hesitation, the young man immediately demands that his father cancel that marriage once and for all. He questions whether Tyria accepted it just to save her family and accuses his father of buying her in a cruel way, with eyes full of tears. The boy begs frantically for the man to change his mind and stop this. His father merely stares at him with a cold, stern look before calmly saying Elric's name. The man looks down on his own son with contempt and sternly orders him to stop acting like a spoiled child. His father coldly states that they are real nobles now, and Elric must start behaving according to his status. That icy, pitiless look from his own father makes the young man shudder inside with pure rage. Faced with that endless coldness, the young man clenches his fists tightly and realizes the sad truth about his life. He remembers that he was always seen as the son to blame for his mother's passing in childbirth and the perfect target for his father's resentment. To that man, Elric was nothing more than a simple tool used to pay off the debt of raising him. The young man realizes that to his own father, he would never be anything more than an object of business and manipulation. That was the only usefulness he ever had his entire life in the cold eyes of that greedy man. Determined to change his fate, the boy decides to turn his back on everything, realizing he needs to disappear from there. He wanted to do this to help the girl who was sold out of desperation and at the same time ruin his father's plans. He holds the wooden object with absolute firmness, sealing his decision to abandon everything once and for all. From that moment on, the young man swore to himself that he would completely abandon the Portman name. Under heavy, relentless rain, the wind blows against the wheat fields stretching into the dark night. The young man walks alone down the muddy road with his belongings on his back, leaving his former home behind. He wonders about the real reason for Tyria's crying, whether it was sadness over being sold or longing for her own family. Another painful doubt hammered in his head. Could it be that she simply didn't like his looks? He sighs in the middle of the storm, accepting that he might never find out the true answer to those questions. The young man decides to brush those thoughts aside. After all, he was already leaving, and there was no turning back. The jerk abandoned his wife. The scene cuts to an imposing medieval stone fortress under a sky heavy with dark clouds and rain. An extremely muscular, scarred man looks at the boy in surprise and asks what he just said. The warrior asks if that skinny kid really came all the way there with the intention of becoming a mercenary. With a firm, completely focused look, the boy answers directly that yes, that was his strong desire. He introduces himself using a brand new identity and says his name from now on is Kasha. Giving up the name Elric Portman for good, the young man spent the next 10 years fighting non-stop on the battlefield. Wielding his sword in desperation, he became a wandering mercenary roaming through war, looking for a place to pass away. Without anyone knowing about his real past, he became known to everyone in the war as the feared sword demon. Standing before the golden sunset horizon, the warrior holds his massive weapon, waiting for the next fight. With his armor gleaming under the setting sun, he maintains an imposing stance. Ready to face any challenge, his red eyes reflect the evening light as he focuses his attention on the enemies approaching ahead. A troop of enemy soldiers, heavily armed with spears and rifles, lines up on the front line of battle. The warriors rush in a pack toward the mercenary, shouting loudly to try and intimidate him before direct combat. Without flinching, he grips the hilt of his sword with extreme firmness and raises the golden blade against his opponents. Kasha charges at the enemies, dealing powerful blows with his greatsword. He lands the hits without showing any emotion, leaving only the blood of his opponents on his face. The scene shifts to the inside of a peaceful tavern, where customers chat quietly with one another. The tavern keeper hears the door chime ring and looks toward the entrance with great curiosity. He welcomes the customer who just arrived, while a hand holding a cane appears on screen. Kasha enters the place dressed in elegant civilian clothes. Walking silently with the help of a cane, everyone in the tavern starts watching him limp, whispering in surprise as they recognize the figure who just walked in. The men ask each other if that isn't the legendary sword demon and why he'd be there instead of on the battlefield. They continue gossiping indiscreetly, noticing that his leg seems to be badly injured. The tavern keeper serves a drink and asks Kasha directly what happened for him to be limping like that. Kasha calmly replies that it's just a minor battle wound, and the man remarks that such things are common around there. While replying that he'll probably be limping for a good while, the young man opens the local newspaper to read the day's news. Suddenly, he sees something shocking on the page and grips the paper tightly. Going into complete shock, the tavern owner notices the sudden change in behavior and stares at him with great concern. Kasha stares at the paper with a dark look, prompting the tavern keeper to ask if something is wrong. On the crumpled newspaper page, a picture of his father was printed, the man he hated so much. The story moves forward to an iron train crossing a huge plain under a beautiful reddish sunset. Inside the carriage, the prota travels in absolute silence, lost in thought while watching the scenery pass by the window. He remembers that the face of the man he held so much resentment for was printed in a small corner of that newspaper. It was his father, Hovan Portman, whose passing notice motivated him to return after all these years. He confesses that when he first ran away from home, he still held a tiny sliver of hope that his father would look for him. At the time, being only 14 years old, that was nothing more than a childish and very naive hope on his part. But looking back now, the young man realizes that foolish feeling wasn't completely meaningless. Even if his father treated him as a mere tool and brought about his mother's passing, the connection still existed after all. No matter what happened, he was still that man's son, despite all the bottled-up resentment. Deep down, he wished his father had shown at least a little affection for him, but he knew that was a ridiculous joke. It was all a silly illusion, and now that his father was gone, the main target of his hatred was gone too. Using his father's passing as an excuse, he was heading back home knowing he was acting in a wretched and cowardly way, feeling only a vast emptiness and a slight regret. The young man finds himself trapped in memories from 10 years ago. The conductor announces the arrival at the final destination, and the train finally stops in the peaceful town of Wiben. The sun warmly illuminates the vast fields of golden wheat covering the entire Wiben region. As he steps off, the young man notices that 10 years have passed, but absolutely nothing has changed in that beautiful place. He walks slowly through the quiet streets, which are completely covered by reddish autumn leaves. Seeing people walking unhurriedly and living in peace shows that this town was never touched by the cruelty of war. Children run happily alongside him, creating an atmosphere that feels both familiar and strange to him now. He continues his path with slow steps, listening to the rhythmic sound of his cane tapping the dirt ground. Feeling the soft, late-afternoon breeze, a rare, faint smile of tranquility breaks across the young man's face. He admires the vast field of golden wheat, which was always the grand symbol of the Wiben territory and remains just the same. The young man recalls the games of hide-and-seek he used to play with the local kids in his childhood. He also fondly remembers getting scolded by the maids for getting dirt all over his clothes while playing with every step he takes toward his old home. The memories of his happy past grow clearer and clearer. Kasha repeats the word memories in his thoughts, feeling a mix of nostalgia and melancholy over it. Suddenly, he stops walking right in his tracks upon spotting something just up ahead. He widens his red eyes a bit and keeps an expression of deep surprise at what he sees. At that moment, he catches himself wondering how the young lady has been living after this whole decade passed by. He assumes she must be doing great, because being so beautiful, surely some noble man must have married her by now. The young man reaches out his hand to lightly stroke the golden stalks of wheat while lost in his thoughts. Suddenly, the voice of someone shouting Tyria Wiben's name echoes through the field, leaving the young man completely stunned. Looking back, he sees a beautiful blonde young lady harvesting wheat while the maid runs up, worried about the heavy load she's carrying. The maid insists on taking the heavy bundle from her hands, confirming that this woman really is his former bride. Kasha freezes completely and wonders if that woman harvesting wheat right in front of him is truly Tyria Wiben. The maid walks quickly toward her, calling her my lady as her footsteps echo against the ground. With his heart pounding, he stares at her from afar and silently wonders why she's still in this place. He keeps watching her expression and questions why she still continues to live in that very same region. The two stand facing each other in the middle of the massive field under an amazingly golden sunset. Kasha stares at her in silence, trying to find the right words to start such a difficult conversation. Tyria then breaks the ice and asks him directly why he showed up there after so much time. Surprised by the young woman's direct question, the young man stutters a bit, not knowing exactly what to answer. She stares at him firmly and says plainly that she is still officially his lawful wife. Hearing that makes the young man smirk, realizing how naive and foolish he'd been all those years. He realizes how childish he was to believe that marriage would simply be annulled just because he vanished. After all, if that marriage was an easy thing to undo, she never would have been sold in the first place. Kasha blames himself, thinking that his impulsive past actions might have stripped away her very last drop of freedom. He realizes that, in the end, his impulsive runaway was a majorly selfish act on his part. The young man feels ashamed for leaving behind the woman who married him, being unable to protect even her pride. He views himself as nothing more than a weak, cowardly, and extremely selfish man for acting that way in his youth. The young man thinks that while he was focused solely on fighting and wielding his bloody sword on the battlefield, she had to endure extremely tough, painful, and lonely moments all by herself at home. He knows that the only right thing to do now is to offer her a sincere apology for everything he caused, but the young man hesitates, wondering if he even has the right to do so or if she simply doesn't want to hear it. Kasha tries to stutter out some justification right there, but the words just choke in his throat out of pure shame. Tyria just watches him intently in absolute silence, keeping a neutral expression without showing any reaction. Without dragging out that tense atmosphere in the field, she calmly asks for both of them to head inside the mansion for now. She turns around and walks elegantly back toward the country house, leaving the young man behind watching her steps. Kasha follows her slowly with his cane, feeling a massive weight on his conscience over that whole embarrassing situation. He vents inwardly, wishing from the bottom of his heart that she would at least get furious with him and scream. But instead, he fears that her quiet composure hides a deep resentment over being abandoned in the past. He wonders if she's privately asking herself what on earth he wants now. Returning so suddenly out of nowhere, the young man startles upon realizing someone is approaching him quickly from the entrance of the large house. His eyes widen in surprise as he recognizes the bespectacled person walking in his direction at that moment. While Tyria continues moving calmly along the dirt path, the young man remains frozen in the exact same spot. Noticing he stopped, she glances over her shoulder and sweet talks, asking if he isn't coming along with her. The young man is left speechless for a few seconds, completely disarmed by his wife's peaceful demeanor. He grips his cane quite firmly and replies decisively that he's already heading her way. The two walk side by side across the sunlit land, under the watchful, rhythmic tap of the prota's cane. The scene cuts to the imposing front of the mansion, glowing spectacularly in the warm colors of the setting sun. Tyria mentions she's going inside to fetch the property's butler and kindly asks him to wait outside. She opens the large glass door and steps into the residence, while the young man merely watches her with a thoughtful look. Suddenly, he senses a familiar presence coming down the outer hallway and turns around attentively. Looking closely at the grand, luxurious stone structure, he realizes that absolutely nothing has changed around there. It's hard for him to believe he's been gone for 10 long years, since every corner of the property looks identical. He remembers every detail perfectly, from the exact number of windows to the tiny blemishes on the walls. A faint, nostalgic smile touches the young man's lips as he realizes how alive his old memories still are. Suddenly, Rhonda approaches him with slow steps and asks with great confusion who he is and what he wants. The young man lets out just a surprised murmur, instantly recognizing the features of his old acquaintance. She stares at him with serious suspicion, asking again who exactly he's looking for. Unable to contain his huge surprise at meeting her again, the young man shouts Rhonda's name aloud with joy. Looking at her closely, he remarks excitedly that she hasn't changed one bit, even after a whole decade away. With a warm smile on his face, the young man asks kindly if she really can't recognize him. Rhonda adjusts her glasses and stares at him with total doubt and confusion, trying to figure out who this mysterious guy is. Suddenly, Rhonda's eyes go wide behind her spectacle lenses. Completely shocked by the revelation, she stutters, unable to believe her eyes, asking if he is really her young master. The maid approaches emotionally and asks if the young man in front of her is indeed young master, Elric. Elric hugs her affectionately and says, "It's been a long time," confirming that he's finally back home. With tears filling her eyes, Rhonda gets overwhelmed with emotion, realizing her dear young master has actually returned. She says she almost didn't recognize him because of so many physical changes and how much he grew in these 10 years. The young man smiles understandingly, commenting that he really did change a lot and that it's natural for her not to recognize him. He remembers what Tyria said a moment ago about still officially being his wife. He turns around thoughtfully, remembering that he spent the last 10 years fighting in the middle of that bloody war. Noticing his distant look, the maid asks worriedly if something is wrong with him. Elric thinks that if even Rhonda, who cared for him like a mother, barely recognized him, the change was truly drastic. A major doubt resurfaces in his mind, leaving him intrigued about how things turned out that way. The young man looks visibly flustered and confused as he tries to process that intriguing mystery. He wonders how Tyria managed to recognize him with just one glance, even after he changed so drastically inside the manor. The soft evening wind gently rustles the white curtains of an open window. Tyria stands near the bedroom window, silently observing the activity outside. She watches Elric's emotional reunion with the maid in the courtyard and remains in absolute silence. The young man glances back quickly, feeling his face flush with embarrassment from the memories of their reunion. Realizing he looked in her direction, she quickly hides behind the curtain, her heart fluttering fast, completely blushing and breathing a bit heavily. She tries to calm down while leaning against the bedroom wall. She remembers perfectly the distinct scar the young man has on the back of his neck. His brown hair and his eyes were also details she could never forget in her life. Tyria realizes that, deep down, absolutely nothing changed in the essence of the young man she waited for so long. While relaxing in a luxurious mansion bathtub, Elric keeps thinking about how strange all of this was. He repeatedly questions himself about what the secret could have been for Tyria to recognize him so easily. The young man decides to get out of the warm bath water, wrapping up his thoughts so he can get dressed. Wearing an elegant white robe, he ties the belt while showing off his battle scars on his chest. Suddenly, he spots something unexpected in front of him and lets out a confused murmur, his red eyes widening to his surprise. Tyria walks into the same room wearing only a towel wrapped around her body, leaving him stunned. Upon noticing the young man's presence right there in the same bathroom, the young lady's face turns completely red from embarrassment. In total panic, trying to cover up as much as she can, she stutters out desperate apologies for her mistake. Faced with her embarrassed tears, Elric tries to calm her down quickly, telling her to take a deep breath first. He waves his hands in desperation, begging her not to cry and assuring her that everything is truly okay. The young man carefully reaches out his hand toward her face, trying to comfort her in that tense moment. Suddenly, a young maid opens the door and lets out a deafening scream of horror upon catching that intimate scene. In full-blown panic over what she just witnessed, the girl turns around and runs away as fast as she can. She runs down the hallways, shouting frantically for the mistress, completely failing to understand what just went down. In the confusion of the shock, Tyria ends up slipping, and Elric quickly catches her, holding her firmly against his body. The two wind up pressed together in an extremely awkward position, with blushing faces and hearts pounding fast. She looks up at him with teary, embarrassed eyes and softly calls out Marie's name, completely at a loss for what to do. Elric tries to explain the awkward situation to the maid who ran off, justifying that the mistress was just about to fall. The scene shifts dramatically to the border defense line, where the 5th Regiment of the Kingdom of Chevor waits on guard among the invaders, is the feared knight Lebron, leading the Imperial Army's elite squad with a sadistic grin. Chevor's soldiers charge with determination into combat, shouting orders to advance and eliminate the enemy knight. Lebron raises his giant sword in fury, mocking his opponents and shouting that he'll slice up anyone who gets in his way. The knight pushes forward relentlessly, landing lethal blows that send Chevor's soldiers flying through the air. Terrified by the slaughter, the fighters realize they are no match for that devastating force. The commander shouts frantically for everyone to fall back immediately and seek cover behind the main defense line. However, heading opposite the massive retreat of his allies, Kasha walks calmly toward the center of battle with his sword. The Imperial soldiers spot him and wonder, intrigued, who that lone mercenary marching against them could be. Kasha takes a firm combat stance with his longsword, ready to face his opponents. With a cold, focused glare, he carefully analyzes the approach of each Imperial warrior. Lebron rushes toward him at high speed, throwing a sweeping strike with his sharp blade. However, the young man dodges the brutal attack with extreme agility, making the knight strike nothing but air. Kasha quickly positions his sword in front of his body, preparing a precise surgical counterattack. With a swift motion, the mercenary strikes the enemy's neck, sending blood spraying right then and there. Unable to withstand the fatal strike, the imposing Imperial knight drops to his knees on the ground, completely defeated. To finish the fight once and for all, the young man lands the final blow with absolute precision. The warrior's helmet rolls across the muddy ground, leaving the Imperial soldiers completely horrified by the sight. They watch in terror, unable to believe their elite leader was taken down so quickly and easily. Kasha coldly introduces himself to the survivors, stating that he is just Kashida, a simple mercenary from Chevor. The young man challenges them to all come at once if they have the nerve, promising to wipe every single one of them out right there. Suddenly, he senses an imminent danger coming from the sky and looks up with great concern. A massive shield of blue mana appears in the sky, blocking a devastating attack that was coming straight at them. Even while trying to defend himself, the young man is hit by the brutal impact of the strike and gets blasted backward. He falls to his knees on the ground, badly injured in the leg and bleeding heavily after taking that overwhelming hit. Screaming in pain and frustration, he tries to hold his ground while glaring at the new enemies appearing on the hill. Atop a distant cliff, two mysterious figures stand impressively, watching the entire battlefield. The two wear sleek black clothes, top hats, and striking gas masks, with one of them carrying a sniper rifle. Suddenly, the young man wakes up startled and panting, his red eyes wide open and sweating heavily from terror. Sitting up in bed, he holds a dagger with both hands near his chest, taking deep breaths as he tries to calm down. Still under the effect of the terrible nightmare of war, the young man tries to regain his composure and self-control. Slowly, he lowers the dagger's blade and inspects the luxurious, quiet room around him with a hint of suspicion. The morning sunlight pours into the massive room, illuminating every detail of that peaceful, quiet environment. The young man sighs in relief, reminding himself that it was all just a bad dream and that he's safe at home now. The sudden sound of knocking at the door startles him, making him shrink back in bed in an instinctive defensive reaction. He points the dagger toward the entrance out of pure reflex while hearing Rhonda ask from outside if he's awake. The boy swallows hard and tries to hide his intense tension so he doesn't look paranoid to the maid. He calls out, confirming that yes, he's wide awake and ready to start the new day. The young man discreetly puts away the dagger and lets her know in a calmer tone that he just woke up a moment ago. Rhonda opens the door carefully and enters the bedroom, carrying a wooden basin, maintaining her polite demeanor. The young man thinks that he merely asked for cold water to wash up, and she promptly brought a full basin for him, putting on his new clothes. He notices how amazingly soft and comfortable the fabric feels compared to what he used to wear. In front of the large mirror, the young man reflects on how all that luxury felt like something he simply didn't deserve. He tries to force a faint smile at himself in the mirror, but his expression still looks a bit forced. He realizes he doesn't even know how to smile properly anymore, wondering if his time in the war froze his emotions. Rhonda opens the door and walks into the room, commenting with a gentle smile that he looks much better dressed like that. With great politeness, she politely asks for the young master to head downstairs for breakfast first. She asks what happened to his leg, and he lies, saying he carelessly tumbled down a steep hill. He thinks that he could never reveal that it was caused by a bullet lodged in his knee, so as not to worry her. Rhonda chuckles softly, saying he's still the same troublemaker, and the young man tries to defend himself with an awkward laugh. At that moment, elegant and soft footsteps begin to echo down the vast main hallway of the residence. Tyria approaches calmly with a very serene and delicate look, illuminated by the pleasant early morning light. She stops in front of the young man with great grace and sweetly asks if he managed to sleep well. The young man instantly remembers the scene of her in the bathroom, wearing only that towel, which leaves him quite flustered. He stutters back that he slept well thanks to her, but ends up mentally calling himself a pervert over the situation. In the hallway, the other maid, Marie, points an accusing finger at the young man and loudly calls him a pervert. Due to the unnecessary scene, Rhonda gives the girl a smack on the head and sternly orders her to quiet down. Tyria kindly wishes him a great day while the staff drag the loud young maid away. Awkwarded out by all that morning commotion, the young man just clears his throat quietly to try and hide his embarrassment. The young man replies warmly that he slept very well and kindly, thanks her for her hospitality. He asks for the new maid's name, and Tyria explains that her name is Marie and that she's a recently hired employee. When Tyria brings up the fact that Marie called him a pervert, the young man nearly chokes out of sheer embarrassment. He waves his hands nervously, saying it's totally fine and that she really doesn't need to worry about that misunderstanding. He holds his cane firmly against the floor, trying to settle his nerves after that awkward situation. The young man admits, somewhat sheepishly, that it was just silly curiosity since he'd never seen the girl around before. Tyria just listens to the explanation and replies very serenely that she completely understands his curiosity. The two sit at the table for breakfast, maintaining a quiet and slightly shy atmosphere between them. The young lady enjoys her food very delicately and happily, showing a comforting calmness. Elric breaks the room's silence with a timid murmur, getting ready to say something important. He looks thoughtfully at his plate and finally decides to bring up the sensitive topic of what happened yesterday. When asked about what happened yesterday, he specifies that he's referring to the awkward incident in the bathroom. He tries to offer a sincere apology for what occurred, but she cuts him off quickly, saying everything is already fine. Even with him insisting he shouldn't have acted like that, she urges him to calm down and eat. And he ends up giving in. Her face turns extremely red, and she grips her dress tightly, trying to hold back her emotions. In total silence, the young lady stares into space for a few seconds, while her face remains super flushed. Uncomfortable with that tense mood, the young man scratches the back of his neck and thinks about how to act more naturally from then on. Tyria recalls the image of him coming out of the bath with his robe half open, exposing his terrible battle scars. She wonders how much he must have suffered and how many trials he went through to have so many marks on his body. Back at the dining table, the two continue eating in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The young man bitterly regrets bringing up the subject, thinking that weird tension is going to drive him crazy. In a surge of pure anxiety, he starts cutting the food on his plate extremely fast and noisily. He shoves a huge piece into his mouth and ends up coughing, having to quickly use a napkin while she looks at him, startled. Trying to escape the embarrassment, he stands up quickly, gives a thumbs up and says he needs to step out for a bit. She simply answers quietly with a simple yes, watching her husband's hurried exit from the dining room. With all her usual gentleness, the young lady wishes him a great day out with a sweet smile. Right after breakfast, the large mansion gets quite busy with the staff performing their daily chores. Guided by Rhonda, the young man greets each of the house's servants, who welcome him with open arms and great joy. One of the servants gossips excitedly, joking about the rumor of him hitting on the mistress and calls him a real man. Marie pops up among them with her hands on her hips and a pouting face, loudly repeating that he's a pervert. The girl argues with the other servants, telling them all to get real instead of defending that behavior. She keeps complaining about his return after 10 years, but gets interrupted by the butler holding her shoulder. The man asks her not to be so hard on the young master, commenting that she's still too young to understand things. He explains that the duty of every noble is to produce a legitimate heir for the family, leaving the girl confused. The butler claims, laughing, that catching them in the bathroom was just the young master fulfilling his noble duty out of pure leader instinct. The man praises him as a true leader, while Elric listens to that absurd conversation, dying of embarrassment. The butler asks excitedly if his return means he's back to stay, and the young man just lets out a nervous chuckle. Gripping the handle of his cane tightly, he admits that he actually hasn't made any solid plans for the future yet. The young man reflects that he's taking shelter there temporarily because of his knee, but feels he has no right to act like the boss. He says goodbye, stating he needs to head out and that they'll talk later, hearing the butler say that what matters is his return. He asks Aldio to prepare a carriage for his outing, and the loyal staff member promptly obeys the order. The wooden carriage rolls noisily down the dirt roads, cutting through Wibbin's beautiful golden fields. From the middle of the wheat field, Tyria quietly watches the vehicle slowly fade toward the horizon. The strong wind blows her long blonde hair, while she holds her straw hat firmly and watches him depart. From above, the carriage can be seen traveling alone down the road, lined with orange-leaved trees. The carriage stops, and the young man walks up to the top of a peaceful hill where a gray stone tombstone stands. The young man gazes at the stone monument with a sad look and softly whispers that it's really been a long time. Standing before the grave where "in memory" is written, he calls out in thought to his late father. The young man confesses that he held a massive resentment toward him his whole life, but feels an inexplicable void now. He vents sadly before the tombstone, admitting he never wished for their reunion to be like this. Hovan Portman was the great pioneer who turned the Portman family from mere merchants into Wibbin's largest commercial group, but also a villain with many enemies. The young man wonders if his father ever in his life smiled at him or said a single warm, affectionate word to him. He thinks that since his father decided to act as the big villain in his life, he should at least have lived a little longer. Elric stands in absolute silence before the grave, letting the hill wind blow the leaves around him. With his heart a bit lighter, he confesses in thought that he no longer holds as much resentment toward his father. He then calls for his loyal butler Aldio, preparing to ask a few important questions about the passing. The young man asks how his father passed away, and the staff member reveals that the deceased suffered from a severe heart condition. Aldio explains that he hid the illness until the end, and the young man merely murmurs in surprise at that unexpected revelation. The butler shares that upon learning his end was near, the man focused entirely on wrapping up his business and liquidating his assets. Elric gives a brief, ironic smile and comments that Aldio is a very unusual and loyal employee. He asks with curiosity why the butler stayed so devoted to a man known for being so cold. Without hesitation, Aldio answers with a calm smile that he did it all for money, asking what other reason there could be. The butler notices that Elric is deep in thought and comments that the young master hasn't yet asked the question that truly matters. The staff member reminds him that he had already mentioned his father's inheritance, having liquidated absolutely everything he could. The young man listens closely as the butler continues explaining the fate of all that accumulated fortune. The man solemnly reveals that the entire massive inheritance was left exclusively to him, the young master. The carriage begins its journey back, passing slowly under the canopy of golden trees lining the road. Inside the carriage, the young man rests his chin on his hand and asks the butler if the deceased left a will. Aldio says he wasn't that type, and that there are only instructions regarding the inheritance, offering to show him the document. The young man squeezes the top of his cane tightly, confessing he still can't figure out his father's true intentions. He remembers that his father always acted with extreme coldness and professional precision when it came to closing major deals. Aldio gently advises the young man to take all the time he needs to think carefully about the destination of his inheritance. While observing the beautiful golden scenery out the vehicle's window, Elric recalls a very important detail. He questions why his wife still remains at the mansion, since the marriage should have been annulled after his runaway. The butler comments that it was, in the end, an arranged marriage. In other words, a business deal disguised as matrimony. Elric asks if that would be reason enough, and Aldio says yes, but mentions he forgot to state one detail. The staff member reveals that the Portman family is now a hereditary barony, and the noble title will pass to Elric. He emphasizes that absolutely the entire fortune belongs solely to the young master, not to Lady Tyria, as the vehicle comes to a stop. The carriage finally parks in front of the luxurious mansion under the bright light of a clear, sunny day. Stepping out, the young man considers that it's been a year since his father's passing, and if her plan was money, she wouldn't have stayed this long. Aldio remarks that she could have taken the inheritance as power of attorney and left, but chose to stay of her own free will. The young man is quite surprised to hear that and immediately asks if the staff member knows the reason behind her decision. The butler admits that Tyria is a woman of few words and confesses that the staff isn't actually very close to her. He explains that she possesses such an imposing air of nobility that it makes approaching difficult, preventing servants from questioning her. Elric comments that she seems tough to reach, but Aldio reminds him that she's his wife, and the young man replies she's practically a stranger. With a very understanding smile on his face, the old staff member wisely notes that every relationship starts out like that. The young man turns around and begins walking slowly up the front steps with the help of his essential cane. Reaching the top of the stairs, he unexpectedly runs into Tyria, who was waiting for him in silence, leaning against a pillar. The young lady slightly turns her gaze away, her cheeks turning bright red beneath the brim of her large straw hat. Without uttering a single word, she begins walking back inside the house with very elegant, silent steps. The young man turns to her, somewhat surprised, and asks if she's really back from her chores in the wheat field already. She turns back very shyly and delicately asks at what point he had returned from his outing. She explains she just arrived, revealing she was making her way back from her usual tasks in the wheat field. Elric kindly suggests that they head into the mansion together, and the young lady sweet-talks in agreement with a gentle nod. The two walk up the imposing inner marble staircase of the residence, maintaining a respectful and quiet distance. He mentally blames himself for trying to stretch out that awkward conversation, thinking his own mouth is always the main problem. Even so, he can't help but notice that she looks incredibly noble and elegant, even while wearing simple work clothes. He starts wondering nostalgically if she already possessed that same grand, graceful aura 10 years ago. The young man recalls the day of their wedding, when she looked stunning and blushing under the white bridal veil. He startles upon realizing he'd been staring at her for too long and quickly averts his gaze, feeling very awkward. Suddenly, Elric loses his balance and stumbles, causing Tyria to instantly ask if he's okay. He plants his cane firmly against the ground to prop himself up and avoid falling. Elric tries to cover it up with a smile and says he's fine, explaining he walked too much and his legs just buckled for a second. He apologizes to Tyria for not being able to carry things for her due to the trouble with his legs. She sweetly replies that it's totally fine and that she's already used to that tough situation. She explains she's accustomed to heavy labor because she learned everything directly from the former head of the house. Elric is quite surprised and thinks to himself that acting like that was totally his late father's style. The young man recalls that his father was the type of man who made a point to inspect important business matters in person. He remembers that his father sold off the other businesses and kept only the farm, likely handing full command over to Tyria. With these thoughts in mind, Elric suddenly stops right in his tracks in the middle of the hallway. He turns around and says he'd like to ask a question, leaving Tyria quite curious. Standing before a large portrait of the deceased on the wall, Elric asks what her relationship with his father was like. Tyria simply answers that she only learned about business matters and doesn't recall anything beyond that. The young man then works up the courage to ask if at any point his father ever mentioned anything about him. She glances to the side with a somewhat shy look and answers directly that he never spoke of him. The young man reflects that a cold father and such a quiet woman must have spoken strictly about work matters. Staring intently at the grand painting of his father, Elric merely whispers that he understands the situation. He mentions he needs to get back to work, but she finds it odd and asks if he hadn't already finished his tasks for the day. Elric explains he still needs to review pending documents, which leaves the young wife a bit confused. Tyria asks, surprised, if he works in the field by day and reviews documents by night, and he confirms he does. She says goodbye, stating she'll see him again at dinner, and Elric just nods in a somewhat clumsy manner. The young man is overcome with guilt, thinking that if he hadn't run away, all those responsibilities would be his instead of hers. He reflects that it would be easier on his conscience if she hated him, but she has never complained about anything to this day. As he walks back limping, Elric keeps a very thoughtful and serious expression on his face. Suddenly, a loud noise of something dropping startles the young man, making him instantly look toward the sound. He comes across the young maid Marie fallen on the floor, surrounded by several scattered letters that spilled out of a box. Marie panics, not knowing what to do about the mess. While Elric observes her from afar without understanding a thing, he offers to help, but she worries about his leg, leading him to calm her down and ask what the letters are about. The maid replies that the mail is for the mistress, leaving the young man quite curious about the information. Elric starts to comment with a slight smile that there really seems to be a huge stack of letters there. Suddenly, his expression changes completely, and his eyes widen in surprise as he notices a detail on one letter. He realizes the letter is from the Wibben territory and was sent by her family, which leaves him extremely intrigued. Later, in his study, the young man sits down and begins carefully reading the contents of one of the letters. The text tells Tyria to come home after 10 years of suffering, suggesting she find a new husband and stop waiting. He reflects that his father left the entire fortune to him and nothing to her, who worked hard for 10 years and must have felt wronged. Elric thinks that even if she had taken all the money for herself, it would still be fair compensation for her effort. The young man begins to question if the only reason she still remains in the house is because of his late father's inheritance. He rests his hand on his face, deep in thought, trying to comprehend the true motive behind his wife's actions. The young man stays thoughtful in his chair by the desk, analyzing the situation in a very calm manner. Elric narrows his eyes analytically and focuses his attention on yet another extremely intriguing point. If her goal was just to keep the inheritance, she wouldn't have worked so hard in secret and could have grabbed it all a year ago. The young master rummages through a few drawers in his desk to try and find more clues about what's going on. Upon opening a drawer, he finds a large stack of stashed correspondence and comments that they really were right there. Elric notices the letters started arriving a year ago regarding the inheritance, but it seems she never sent a single reply. Some letters went as far as begging for a reply from her, making the young man let out a long sigh at the sight of it all. He realizes she was simply protecting that valuable inheritance, even knowing the true owner might never return. Since even the manager Aldio knew nothing about this, she certainly kept this secret completely guarded from everyone. He looks through the large study window and watches his wife walking peacefully through the wheat field. Given this, the young man realizes she had been fighting that lonely battle all by herself for the entire year. He smiles and thinks he'd have no right to complain if she had run off, questioning why she chose to live such a hard life. In her luxurious bedroom, Tyria sits at her vanity, calmly getting ready in front of the mirror with delicate movements. She fastens a pretty white ribbon to tie back a portion of her long blonde hair. She looks at herself in the mirror, wearing an elegant blue and white dress, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. Meanwhile, the maid Marie watches the scene super excited, whispering that the moment has finally arrived. She joyfully celebrates the fact that the young master took the initiative to ask for a date. For the first time, Marie recalls that his behavior in the bathhouse was absurd, but considers that butler Aldio was also saying a thing or two. The servant suggests that having an heir would be fantastic for the mistress. Leaving Tyria completely confused by the chatter, Marie approaches quickly with short, bouncy steps across the bedroom's wooden floorboards. Suddenly, the maid drops to her knees and tightly holds the fabric of her lady's blue dress. Tyria gets quite a jump, seeing Marie begging on her knees in front of her with a dead serious face. The girl says the young man is a pervert for abandoning her for 10 years, but agrees with Aldio that they ought to be together. She shouts that they need to consummate the marriage as soon as possible and have a cute baby for the family right away. Marie keeps rambling about babies looking identical to the mistress, so they don't risk turning out like runaways, making Tyria super embarrassed. At that exact instant, firm knocks on the large bedroom door cut off the conversation for good and catch their attention. Butler Aldio announces that everything is ready, and the young lady sweetly replies that she's already heading out. The two begin walking together with elegant steps through the long, luxurious hallways of the Portman mansion. She follows the butler in silence, trying to guess the reason for that unprecedented meeting requested by her young husband Aldio, opens the doors to the tea room, and solemnly announces that the young lady has finally arrived. Sitting elegantly near a large, sunlit window, Elric very kindly invites his wife to step inside. Tyria enters the room with a very noble posture, keeping her usual calm, serene expression. To the click of her heels, the young man watches her while calmly holding his cup of warm tea. Elric takes a sip of his drink in silence, waiting for his young wife to approach and make herself comfortable at the table. The two finally sit face to face to kick off that conversation that seemed so important. The young man apologizes for opening her mail without permission, explaining it accidentally got mixed up with other letters, pointing to the envelope on the table. He asks directly if he could ask her about those letters. Tyria is visibly surprised by the revelation and lets out a soft sigh upon realizing what the topic was about. She slightly lowers her head, letting her long blonde hair hide her worried reaction. Elric mentally confesses to feeling anxious and afraid she'll see him as a shameless man who only wants the inheritance. He comments that he ended up discovering she completely ignored every single letter over the past year. The young man reveals he called her over just to ask why she protected his inheritance when there was no guarantee he'd come back. He emphasizes that she could easily have taken that whole fortune for herself and vanished without a trace. Elric reflects bitterly that, to him, she still seemed like a complete stranger at that moment. A stranger so distant that the fact she protected his property only brought up more and more questions. He asked her to reveal the real reason she didn't return to her home territory when she had the chance. The young lady finally breaks the silence and pronounces the Portman surname in a very firm, decisive manner. She looks straight into his eyes and states with immense pride that her real name now is Tyria Wibben Portman. She declares that she is no longer a lady of Wibben, but rather the lawful lady and administrator of the entire House Portman. Elegantly, she stands up and asks to be excused, claiming she still has many pending tasks to attend to. She walks away with firm, decisive steps, leaving the young man completely speechless at that answer. Elric remains motionless in his chair, quite stunned by the presence and determination displayed by his wife. After Tyria's departure, he stays alone in the tea room, reflecting deeply on everything he just heard. The young man rethinks the question he asked about why she protected his property without even knowing if he'd ever return. He recalls the sweet expression she made before answering, with all the conviction and pride she possessed. The memory of Tyria saying she acted that way simply because she's his wife echoes powerfully. In his mind, back in the study with a dagger in hand, Elric reflects on the true weight of the words responsibility and duty. His wife's strong declaration that she belongs to House Portman keeps repeating constantly in his thoughts. With that, the young man drives his small blade hard into the desk wood to express his mental restlessness. He questions if a noble wife's duty was truly the sole, genuine meaning behind her answer. Elric realizes she protected the Portman family out of pure sense of duty, and that exemplary attitude reminds him of someone from the past. That memory brings to mind the striking image of Elvers Graham, a knight he met back during his war days. Elric remembers meeting Elvers on the battlefield, where they had a purely employer-employee relationship. They won the war with few casualties, but Elvers ended up severely injured and permanently lost the ability to walk. In a wheelchair, Elvers explained he did everything out of duty, as nobles must always set an example for others. To that young knight, war was simply the ideal place to fulfill his duty and responsibility. At the time, Elric even questioned him on whether he didn't mind being just the son of a concubine and half commoner. Elvers joked, saying he was also half noble, and that by fulfilling half his duty, he ended up losing half his body. After that, the knight retired to live quietly in leisure, and even wound up getting married a few years later. Back to reality, Elric focuses his gaze on the small dagger stuck firmly in his study wood. He pulls the blade from the desk with a quick movement, while mentally repeating the words about duty and responsibility. The young man acknowledges he can't erase the 10 years she sacrificed, but knows he can still do something to change things. He's certain that new letters from her family will keep coming without stop, just as they did throughout the year. He finds it odd that they keep demanding answers by letter, yet never made a personal visit to the mansion. Elric knows full well that Tyria would never give him an honest answer, since she isn't one to show her feelings. Fortunately, the young man soon hatches a plan to find out the whole truth and decides to set off immediately by carriage. The journey takes him directly to the grand, luxurious mansion belonging to the traditional yet bankrupt Wibben family. Arriving before the large iron gates, Elric looks at the residence and murmurs thoughtfully about the place. Thinking the place is over the top, he decides to go for a direct approach, which happens to be his specialty. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Tyria's parents are already commenting with disdain on the imminent return of their runaway son-in-law. Tyria's mother complains that the young man came back just now, arrogantly claiming he only wants to get his hands on the inheritance. Her father expresses deep concern, fearing Elric might want to lay claim to all rights over the inheritance. The woman walks with firm steps, fanning herself in a very impatient and irritated manner down the hallway. The The noble couple heads toward the reception hall for the meeting, spewing venom with their harsh words. The Baron whispers with heavy prejudice that Elric is nothing more than a gold-digging commoner who only cares about money. The Baroness agrees, saying he wasted 10 years of their daughter's life, claiming that raising her cost them dearly. The Baron then zeroes in on the main point and greedily mentions the massive inheritance left by the late Hovan Portman. He states with absolute conviction that the young man is obligated to pay back every single cent using that money. The man grips the golden doorknob tightly, preparing to confront his young son-in-law. Opening the hall doors, they find Elric waiting calmly on his feet, holding his cane. He politely introduces himself as Elric Portman and offers a sincere apology for the huge delay in paying his respects. The Baron mocks him, saying it took 10 years to see his face, while his wife sarcastically pretends to understand. Elric sits down in front of them and gets straight to the point, mentioning he saw the letters sent to the mansion regarding the inheritance. The Baron says since he read them, everything will go quickly, claiming he only sent the letters out of concern for his daughter. He calls the young man shameless for abandoning their daughter and comments that he heard about the huge inheritance. The man scoffs and says it's ridiculous for a limping commoner like him to inherit everything, doubting his management skills. He argues it was Tyria who took care of everything and arrogantly warns he's going to speak much more clearly. The Baron openly declares they intend to take the entire inheritance as fair payment for Tyria's abandonment. He asks if it isn't shameful for the young man to want the money, saying he doubts he'd use the property for anything useful. The Baroness spews her venom, saying their daughter must have suffered way too much due to Elric's incompetence. The two conclude in total wicked harmony that the only right path is for them to take control of the entire inheritance. Elric grows furious and finds the whole thing disgusting, realizing their only actual goal is to steal his father's fortune. He notices that after his father's passing, and with Tyria all alone, these greedy people saw the perfect chance to pull off a scam. The young man realizes they intend to sell their own daughter again out of pure greed, without giving a damn about her. Elric takes a deep breath with his head down, thinking that conversation has crossed every line of what's acceptable. The young master then cracks a faint, sarcastic smile and begins to speak in a very serene, calm manner. He falsely apologizes for not bringing his wife, claiming she was extremely busy with business matters. The Baron slams his hand on the table in a rage and yells at him not to change the subject, demanding to talk only about the inheritance. The man demands he hand over the property immediately, asking if he thinks it's fair to keep everything after vanishing for 10 years. Elric rests his hand on his face and lets out a sarcastic laugh upon hearing the Baron accuse him of being a greedy person, with his red eyes glowing with rage. Elric asks what they plan to do if he actually decides to be greedy. Facing the shocked Baron, Elric coldly reaffirms that he will indeed embrace greed and challenges him to do something about it. Elric challenges the Baron and asks what exactly he plans to do against him, questioning why he went silent. In pure fury, the man slams the table hard, unable to contain his rage at his son-in-law's insolence. He shouts angrily, calling the young man insolent for daring to speak to him in such a bold, provocative manner. With a dark glare, Elric thinks to himself that the man seems to have finally grasped the gravity of the situation. He recalls spending 10 years on the battlefield, learning that he doesn't need extreme reactions or unnecessary anger. He knows full well that acting on impulse or giving meaning to useless actions never changes the final outcome of a situation. Elric coldly warns that the Baron better keep his mouth shut if he wants to keep receiving the money he gets. Today, the young man sarcastically remarks that the inheritance belongs to his wife, while the Baron makes such a scene without having any right to it. Turning around to leave, Elric states with disdain that, in the end, Tyria's parents are the ones who are far too greedy. The Baron yells furiously that he won't get away with this and threatens to go to House Portman to ruin the young man's life. Without even looking back, the young man tells his father-in-law to do whatever he wants and says he'll be eagerly waiting for it. Elric's carriage leaves the Wibben residence, heading back down a beautiful sunlit forest road. Inside the vehicle, Elric places his hand over his face in regret and lets out a deep sigh over the earlier mess. He mentally beats himself up for being so shameless, thinking he's no different from her greedy parents. The young man wonders if he really confronted his in-laws out of honor or if he acted out of other motives. He reflects bitterly on whether he said all those things just to feed his own sense of superiority. Elric realizes he didn't feel sorry for his wife, but rather a strange thrill in crushing and humiliating her parents in the argument. The terrifying memory of his own father demanding the price of raising him suddenly pops up in the young man's tormented mind. Overcome with guilt, he realizes he ended up being just as selfish and insensitive as his late father used to be. Suddenly, the driver yanks hard on the carriage reins, bringing the vehicle to an abrupt halt in the middle of the road. Feeling terribly sick, Elric quickly opens the carriage door and steps down hurriedly to catch some air. By the edge of the dirt road, the young man starts feeling physically unwell from all the stress built up throughout the day. With his face covered in cold sweat, he mutters in a deeply depressed tone about his own questionable behavior. Leaning against the side of the wooden carriage, Elric sadly confesses that he considers himself a terrible person. However, suddenly raising his eyes, the young man spots something unexpected and lets out a soft murmur of total surprise. He spots Tyria walking all by herself very peacefully in the middle of a massive field of golden wheat. She wears simple peasant clothes with a scarf on her head, exuding a surreal beauty under the late afternoon glow. Taking in such a serene sight before him, Elric speaks his wife's name in a very gentle tone. Without hesitating another second, he starts running quickly toward the young lady in the middle of the wheat field. He runs with difficulty and thinks about how immensely painful it must have been for her to carry that entire burden alone. The young man reflects that both her greedy parents and his own late father brought nothing but trouble to her life. Marie and Aldio watch the scene surprised, while Elric blames himself for also being a burden in his wife's life. Hearing the fast footsteps, Tyria begins turning around slowly with a very serene expression toward him. With a swift movement, the young man finally reaches her and delicately grabs her wrist in the middle of the crop field. Elric leans his head close, showing exhaustion, leaving the young lady startled by his sudden arrival like that facing his wife in the middle of the vast golden wheat field. Elric tries to catch his breath so he can talk to her. He asks for forgiveness for leaving her alone for 10 years and for lying to himself that it was for her own good. Bowing his head before her in remorse, he deeply regrets all the suffering she went through. She watches him with wide eyes while listening to the young man openly admit that the fault is entirely his. A childhood memory surfaces, showing young Elric throwing rocks to scare off wild dogs attacking Tyria. At the time, little Elric approached, deeply worried, and asked if the girl was okay or if she had been bitten. She answered she was okay, but pointed fearfully at the boy's leg, which was quite bloody and injured. Realizing the injury, the boy panicked and started screaming angrily at the terrible wild beasts. Very shyly, little Tyria kindly asked him to come with her for a moment so she could tend to the wound. She wrapped a bandage around the boy's leg herself, while he introduced himself as Elric Portman and said she didn't need to thank him. Sitting on the grass, he asked if she was always this quiet and bragged that he would be a great knight in the future. The little girl blushed heavily at his words, continuing to fasten the bandage strip very firmly. She smilingly announced the bandage was done, and young Elric thanked her in an awkward manner for the favor. He praised her skill at healing wounds and asked where a noble girl like her had learned all that. She whispered that her nanny cared for her injuries, but Elric complained, saying he couldn't hear her quiet voice. She blushes extremely red from embarrassment, shyly lowering her head without being able to say another word. Elric comments that she's way too shy and warns that if she stays timid like that, she'll never manage to get married. He himself gets awkward and says that if he becomes a royal knight, he could take her as his bride in the future. Hearing that unexpected promise makes little Tyria's heart race with emotion, leaving her totally stunned. Nervous over her silence, the boy yells at her not to get full of herself and that he only wants her around because she heals well. He walks away ranting that she'll still beg to marry him, while Tyria simply watches him in silence. Back to the present, Tyria fondly looks at an old photo of Elric from when he was still just a child. She smiles, remembering he didn't become a knight, but considers that their reunion must have been destiny's work. At the Portman mansion, housekeeper Rhonda asks maid Marie to prepare a table of special snacks for the master and mistress. While the snacks are being prepared, Rhonda accompanies Tyria back through the residence's elegant hallways. Tyria walks with a fairly serious expression, still intrigued by the worried look she saw on her husband's face. She feels somewhat apprehensive and anxious, wondering what the real reason could be for Elric wanting to see her again. Rhonda knocks on the study door and calmly informs the young master that his lady has just arrived for the meeting. The two settle in the hall, and Elric takes a very serious, reflective posture before starting the dialogue. Tyria breaks the silence sweetly and comments that he had mentioned having an important matter to discuss. The young master confirms with a lowered head, explaining he called her because he really needed to tell her something very serious. Looking straight into his wife's eyes, he finally works up the courage and offers a very sincere apology. The young lady is completely surprised by the request and immediately asks what he would be apologizing for. He reveals he wants to apologize for abandoning her on their wedding day, exactly 10 years ago. Elric confesses that at the time he was a foolish, impulsive kid, having no clue about the severe consequences of his rebellious acts. He acknowledges all the pain and hardship she faced alone there and says he needed to apologize, even if late. With a look full of expectation, he asks with complete humility if she'd be able to accept his apology. Tyria calmly replies that he has no reason to apologize, leaving the young man quite surprised by the response. She explains she never held resentment and that staying there at the Portman mansion was purely her own choice. She notices the seriousness in his gaze and considers that since the young man's heart wouldn't be at peace if she didn't do so. With a lovely shy smile on her face, she says she accepts the apology, leaving Elric thoroughly shocked. The young man cracks a very tender, relieved smile, feeling an immense peace wash over his entire chest. At that moment, Elric thanks her immensely for accepting his forgiveness and calls her in a very affectionate, respectful manner. The two begin walking together through the hall, while the young master moves along limping with the aid of his cane. She asks if walking like that bothers him, but he assures her he's fine and tries to shift the focus of the topic. Elric apologizes for taking up her time knowing she's busy, but Tyria kindly asks him not to say that the young lady seems to hesitate for a moment and calls out to him, making the young man give full attention to what she wants to say. With cheeks completely red from embarrassment, she asks him not to call her my lady anymore. Stuttering heavily from shyness, she whispers almost inaudibly that she'd like to be called just wife. Unable to hear the quiet whisper due to her shyness, Elric leans closer, confused, and asks what she said. Suddenly, Marie flings the hall doors open carrying a tray and cheerfully announces that snack time has arrived. Startled by the loud entrance, Elric completely loses his balance, drops his cane, and falls right on top of Tyria. The two crash to the floor together with a loud thump, leaving the young man lying directly over her chest. Marie panics, but butler Aldio jokes that they already seem to be making plans for an air bright red with embarrassment. Elric scrambles up and shouts desperately that it's nothing like what he's thinking. Marie apologizes frantically, while Aldio covers her eyes, saying they should pretend absolutely nothing happened. The butler says he'll instruct the servants not to disturb the couple, making Elric yell in annoyance that he got it all wrong. The young man turns to his wife, totally embarrassed, trying to fix the awkward situation that just went down. Still lying on the floor and extremely flushed, she shyly asks him to step back, leaving him even more frantic. Aldio slowly closes the door with a smile and tells them to enjoy their time alone, making Elric scream his name. Elric's desperate shout trying to explain himself echoes loudly throughout the Portman mansion. Under the lovely night sky the next morning, bright sunbeams stream through the study window to the pleasant sound of birds singing outside. Housekeeper Rhonda sweetly enters the room and gently asks if the young master is already awake. Elric answers with a radiant smile and wishes her a good morning, showing he's in an excellent mood. Rhonda notices the young man's unusual happiness and asks with a smile if something great happened the previous night. She approaches him with a mischievous look and whispers, asking if maybe there's news about a little heir already. Elric yells that whatever old Aldio said is a lie, and Rhonda laughs, cheekily expressing mock disappointment. Rhonda then assumes a serious tone and warns that he can't simply ignore everything that happened the night before. The housekeeper turns impressively and asks him directly if he truly doesn't grasp the situation. She explains that 10 years of abandonment weigh differently on men and women, asking him not to leave Tyria alone again. Meanwhile, in her lovely room, soft morning sunlight illuminates the bedroom where Tyria still rests peacefully in bed. She wakes up feeling much more energized than usual and hugs Elric's portrait with a lovely smile on her face. Staring at his picture as a child, she mentally wishes a good morning to her beloved master of the house. Placing the portrait back on the table, she joyfully reflects on how the previous day brought them much closer. She stretches happily and begins considering the idea of greeting her young husband every morning from now on. The day breaks sunny and bright over the vast golden wheat fields of the Portman family farm. In the dining room, the two sit face to face at the long wooden table to have breakfast together, with calm gestures. She uses her utensils to delicately cut into the fried egg yolk accompanying her meal. She enjoys her food very gracefully and silently, feeling her cheeks warm up a bit from shyness. Elric feels a heavy atmosphere of awkward silence hanging in the air, wondering if it's because of yesterday's mess. The young man gets quite embarrassed, remembering falling directly over her chest the day before. Lost in his private thoughts, he startles when Tyria suddenly calls his name in the middle of the meal. She stutters from embarrassment and shyly asks if he has any free time today for them to go out together on a private stroll. The young man stares at her, thoroughly surprised by the unexpected invitation, repeating the line in his mind to process the idea frantic. She explains, blushing, that it's just to do the harvest inspection in the territory, since the festival is very close, with a friendly smile on his face. Elric says he had actually completely forgotten about the harvest festival. He willingly accepts the invitation and kindly says he'll accompany his wife on the stroll through the territory. Extremely happy with his answer, she timidly nods her head, holding back her joy. Later, from behind a large door, Rhonda asks if Tyria's dress is too tight, and she says it's fine. In the bedroom, Marie helps adjust the details of the lovely blue dress. While housekeeper Rhonda praises the flawless look, Rhonda tells Marie to keep helping the mistress and mentions she's going to Elric's room to help him change clothes. Arriving there, she notices in surprise that the young man has already finished getting dressed by himself and smiles, complimenting his speed. However, looking the young man up and down more closely, Rhonda's smile suddenly vanishes from her face. Rhonda sternly questions him on what he thinks he's doing dressing like a hunter or a pirate for the stroll. She angrily pulls him down the hallway, complaining that he looks like a troublemaker and that they're going on an inspection, not to war. She shoves the young man back into the bedroom and slams the large door shut, making a booming noise. Elric tries to break free and asks Rhonda to leave him alone, assuring her he's perfectly capable of getting dressed himself. Ignoring the young man, the housekeeper pushes him with authority to sit down immediately on the bedroom bench. She puts on her gloves decisively and states that a noble must wear dignified clothes. Ignoring the young man's protests, Rhonda starts stripping off his dark clothes and hunter hat, tossing everything aside without ceremony. Elric laughs frantically and repeats he can dress himself, asking her to just pick the outfits and leave the room. She teases, asking if he's embarrassed around her, reminding him that as a child he used to run around naked all the time. The woman grabs his collar very firmly and authoritatively, leaving the young master quite surprised and tense. Rhonda starts unbuttoning and pulling open his shirt by force, completely ignoring his surprise and his pleas to stop. Suddenly, Rhonda stops dead in her tracks and covers her mouth in shock. Freezing completely at what she sees, Rhonda is confronted with the young master's body completely covered in deep, terrifying battle scars. Trembling with sadness, she cries softly and asks in horror what actually happened for him to end up so battered. Elric tries to cover up the situation with a sad smile, recalling that was precisely why he asked to dress alone. Desperate and weeping heavily, she holds his face affectionately and insists on asking what happened in the war. He sweetly apologizes and promises he'll explain everything in detail once the right time finally comes. With a gentle look, Elric begs Rhonda to keep absolute secrecy about the scars so as not to worry Tyria. Though deeply saddened, the housekeeper wipes her tears and clenches her fists, deciding to honor his request. She accepts the plea and mentions that from now on only she will handle his clothes, receiving a sweet thank you. Later, ready to depart, the young man walks over to the vehicle and asks Aldio if everything is set for the trip. Wearing an elegant suit worthy of his nobility, Elric flashes a handsome, satisfied smile while checking himself out. Before leaving, Aldio comments he thought Elric would show up dressed like a thug and make the mistress faint, but realizes he worried for nothing. Elric smiles and says he almost did, but Rhonda helped him, and the butler agrees that her good taste is always reliable. Suddenly, a sweet voice thanks them for waiting while calling Elric's name, leaving him and the butler surprised. Tyria appears beautifully dressed for the couple's first outing and asks, embarrassed, how her look turned out. The young man turns completely red from embarrassment and stutters out that he thinks she turned out very pretty. His wife thanks him with a smile, while Rhonda merely sighs in silence seeing the young mistress's happiness. Elric then offers his arm and asks if they can set off, and the young lady joyfully accepts as they walk to the carriage. Upon reaching the territory market, someone shouts from afar, telling a friend to look at who had just arrived. People in the market begin whispering in surprise, asking when young Elric Portman returned home. A resident welcomes the young man, while another warns that they should speak respectfully, and Elric asks if everyone is doing well. They keep walking through the busy grocery market of the region. With that, a friendly woman comes running up and asks incredulously if it's really him right there. He affectionately greets her as Aunt Michelle, and she gets emotional seeing how that little boy grew up into a strong man. The couple continues toward the area where the inns and variety shops are located. Another town resident recognizes him from afar and exclaims in surprise, seeing that Elric actually returned. A second man joins the conversation, equally amazed by the noble young man's sudden return. Seeing that he's limping, they ask what happened to his leg, and Elric covers it up, saying it was just a minor scrape. Suddenly, an excited voice shouts calling him boss, making the young man look back quickly. It's Bart, Elric's childhood best friend, who lights up upon confirming that his old boss is back. The two old friends greet each other with a firm handshake full of nostalgia. Elric jokes that Bart hasn't changed at all, while the friend says the young man changed so much he barely recognized him. Bart then greets Tyria respectfully, and she responds warmly, wishing him well. The childhood friend invites Elric to stop by his house during the party later, so they can drink and catch up. Elric happily accepts the invite and promises he'll be there, taking his leave for now. The couple continues their walk through the market while waving back at the lively childhood friend. Bart smiles to himself, thinking he never imagined the two would marry, but admits they make a handsome couple at the end of the day. The couple's carriage makes its way back along the road, crossing vast fields under a beautiful sunset. Inside the vehicle, Elric quietly observes his wife, who is focused on reading a book. He looks closer and notices she's reading a botanical guide with flower illustrations. Wanting to start a conversation, the young man decides to call her gently. Tyria looks up from her reading and sweet talks, asking what he'd like. He admits, a bit embarrassed, that he'd like to help manage the territory and asks her to teach him. He explains that she's been handling everything alone and that he wants to step up to his duties as the master of the house. The young man promises that if she teaches him properly, he'll be a big help, leaving her totally flustered behind her book. She smiles foolishly behind the pages, thinking about how amazing and reliable her husband is with a decisive posture. She snaps the book shut and holds it firmly on her lap. She stares at him firmly and asks if she can be really strict with him, just like she learned from the former master of the house. Elric lets out a light chuckle and warmly replies that she can act exactly like that. He asks if his father really taught her with that much strictness, and she assures him he did, but that she never got scolded because she learned fast. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the dead of night in a noisy tavern near the Chevor border. The place is packed with people chatting and drinking peacefully at the venue's tables. But the peace is interrupted when a mysterious person enters the place, catching everyone's attention curtly. The tavern keeper stops what he was doing and looks at the door. Quite confused by the interruption, a young woman with long red hair and a dark cloak stops at the entrance and warns seriously that she won't ask twice. With a sharp glare, she demands to know the location of the feared sword demon, also known by the name Kasha. The next day, the sun shines brightly, illuminating the grand structure of the Portman mansion inside the study. The only sound to be heard is that of the quill softly gliding across the paper. Elric looks at the stack of documents and asks if she always handles all of this, and the young woman replies it's only during busy seasons. She then stops writing for a moment and calls his name, receiving her husband's immediate attention. She asks, a bit bashfully, if he'd agree to give a speech at the Harvest Festival to celebrate his return. Elric grows a bit tense, repeating the word speech, realizing she wants a celebratory address for the Harvest Festival. He recalls the violent speeches from the war, where leaders screamed for warriors to deal death to the Empire's enemies back then. As the mercenary Kasha, he never paid mind to those loud words while soldiers clamored for death. The young man knows full well he was never in a position to give speeches to inspire others, nor did he ever intend to do so. After all, the real reason he was on that bloody battlefield in the past was completely different. In truth, Elric simply needed any target to unleash all the directionless rage he felt in his chest. He remembers charging fiercely and cutting down his opponents in the thick of combat without hesitating for even a second. He acted practically like a rabid dog, slicing up all his adversaries on the ground without showing a shred of mercy. Faced with so many dark memories, Elric convinces himself that someone with such a violent past could never deliver a beautiful speech. Tyria calls out to him, worried, and he quickly snaps out of it, apologizing and saying he just got distracted. For a brief moment, Elric then proposes a different idea and suggests standing right by her side while she herself delivers the speech to the people. His wife willingly accepts the proposal and agrees to handle speaking at the opening of this year's Harvest Festival. She smiles shyly and thinks there will be other opportunities in the future, as simply having her husband by her side is more than enough. On the day of the event, Tyria gives her speech before the crowd gathered in the square, thanking everyone for their hard work over the past year. Wearing a gorgeous red outfit, she warmly wishes that all residents enjoy the festive day to the fullest. The crowd cheers with joy and shouts excitedly, enthusiastically celebrating the official start of the festivities. After the speech, Tyria affectionately holds her husband's hand and asks if they can go have fun at the festival too. As they walk through the main square, residents notice their approach and start pointing happily at the couple's arrival. A friendly female resident approaches quickly and offers a plate of local food for Tyria to try. Another resident offers a mug filled with ice-cold beer to Elric, kindly asking the boss to drink with them. Smiling, the two thank everyone present and wish everyone a great harvest festival. Suddenly, the girl's eyes widen as she spots something very interesting in the middle of the crowd, becoming totally amazed. She pulls Elric's arm with excitement and asks him to look in the direction of a performance taking place nearby on the makeshift stage. A performer announces loudly for everyone to watch the rare talents brought straight from the royal palace. He raises a gleaming blade before the audience and warns that the incredible act is the famous sword-swallowing trick. The man begins shoving the sword down his throat, leaving Tyria shocked while Elric watches the scene with a rather unimpressed look. The performer finishes the trick with complete success, pulling enthusiastic and excited applause from the young wife. As she stops clapping, she notices her husband has a serious face, completely unimpressed by the whole feat. She asks if he didn't find it amazing, and he covers it up saying he's seen plenty of swords swallowed, without revealing he was the one shoving them into enemies. They keep walking arm in arm and pass by the knife-throwing booth, which features a large wooden target. The booth owner calls Elric over to play, and the kids around get excited thinking the young master is going to join the fun. He points to some apples hanging at the back of the booth and mentions he'll give a prize if the young man manages to hit the target. Elric hesitates, remembering it's been a while since he held a knife, but the kids press on, asking to see the master's skill. Tyria also touches his hand affectionately and encourages him to try, since the local children are super eager to see won over by his wife. Elric accepts the challenge and steps up to the throwing station, making the kids cheer even louder. The booth owner asks him with a smile not to be nervous, without realizing the young man's eyes have become intensely focused. Before the man can even finish explaining the rules, Elric throws the 3 knives so fast that they pierce right through the apples instantly. The shopkeeper is left in absolute shock by what he just saw, while the boys let out a shout of surprise. Tyria is also left wide-eyed and amazed by her beloved husband's flawless, extraordinary aim. Seeing everyone's stunned reaction, Elric breaks into a cold sweat, realizing he should have faked being bad to hide his skill. He decides to play it off as beginner's luck and laughs awkwardly, asking his wife if he didn't embarrass himself. Tyria exclaims that it was incredible and that he looked like a true knight, leaving him bashful over the exaggerated compliment. He wonders if she's more excited than usual because of the festive mood, but feels genuinely happy with her joy. Right after, the booth owner extends his arms to hand over the big prize won by the young noble. The man explains with a smile that the prize is a lovely basket of eggs prepared by the local Merchants Association itself. Elric politely declines the prize and asks the man to give the eggs to the boys there, making the kids shout in joy. Tyria looks at him with great sweetness and comments, her cheeks flushed, that her husband is an extremely kind person. He confesses he did it because he remembered that as a child he also won a basket of eggs and was super happy finding a golden egg inside. Tyria bursts out laughing and recalls that he traded that golden egg for a helmet that was so big it looked like a bucket on his head. Elric stops walking suddenly and, completely shocked, asks how she could know such an old detail from his childhood. Tyria tries to hide her nervousness and says he was very famous in the village, explaining that rumors about the head of the house being a troublemaker were everywhere. However, she thinks to herself that she could never tell the truth and should never reveal that to him. She lacks the courage to confess that she watched him all the time since childhood because she really wanted to become the bride of the housemaster. Elric interrupts her thoughts, calling her my lady to catch her attention. He mentions with a smile that the party after the event is about to start and asks if they should head to the main square. Tyria holds his hand affectionately and agrees with a smile, calling him master of the house. In the square, the master of ceremonies greets all the visitors of Wibben and announces that the ritual to light the festival lights is about to begin. He thanks everyone for coming and asks for applause for the lord and lady, saying the harvest festival shines as bright as her beauty. Elric finds the flattery funny and thinks to himself that the man is a total kiss-ass. The announcer calls on the people to make a wish for Wibben's glory and lasting prosperity before lighting the lights. The man then shouts that they will begin the kissing ceremony between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria, leaving the couple in shock. The two turn completely red and flustered, unsure of how to react in front of that whole crowd. Tyria panics internally, realizing she'll have to kiss him right there in front of everyone. The announcer repeats the welcoming greeting to all the people who came to visit the town of Wibben. He insists that before starting the ritual, everyone should wish plenty of prosperity and glory for the region. Next, the man loudly declares the start of the traditional kissing ceremony between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. The two look at each other completely awkward and flustered by the unexpected crowd pressure around them. The guy with the torch playfully asks what the Lord is waiting for to finally kiss his beloved wife. He rallies the crowd to shout loudly so the ruler builds up the courage, once and for all, to act. The whole square starts chanting for the kiss, leaving the two even more embarrassed by the situation. Elric steps closer and asks her for permission for a moment, leaving the young woman quite confused by the sudden request. Suddenly, the young lord pulls Tyria into a dramatic dip hug in the middle of the empty street space. He brings his face close to hers quickly, making the young lady's cheeks turn bright red from surprise. He apologizes and explains that the crowd won't stop shouting unless they do this, suggesting they just play along with the festival mood. She accepts the housemaster's proposal with an understanding smile, but warns that she has something more to say. Tyria pulls her husband in and promises she won't just pretend halfway, giving him a real kiss with deep passion. With the couple's kiss, the massive bonfire is lit and the crowd goes wild, celebrating joyfully around them. The people wish for their love to be eternal and shout, wishing great glory to the entire territory of Wibben. At the end of that night, the sounds of celebration and affection between the couple continue echoing all the way to the mansion quarters. Back in the bedroom, Tyria buries her face in the pillow out of pure embarrassment, remembering what just happened. She catches her breath with difficulty, her face burning as she recalls the details of that romantic moment. The young lady goes into complete despair, unable to believe how bold she was with the head of the house. She worries, thinking he'll view her as a weird woman, and spends the entire festival night unable to sleep. On the other side, Elric's heart is also beating wildly in bed as he touches his lips, still in shock. The scene shifts to the EW, residence in Whitewick, located within the Grand Kingdom of Armen inside. A sophisticated man wearing glasses calmly takes a sip from his luxuriously decorated teacup. A secretary approaches and informs President White that the Imperial Army managed to break through the Palvan and Chever border defense line. She explains that without Kasha's presence to defend them, the territories are crumbling with zero chance of resistance. Duke Edward White smiles in satisfaction and remarks that targeting the warrior Kasha was indeed a brilliant masterstroke. His personal secretary, Agnes Blackmere, listens in silence, maintaining an extremely cold, professional posture. Agnes questions whether it's truly wise to let those places fall into the Empire's hands, since both hold major shares in the EW. Group Edward recalls that the War of Conquest has been going on for 7 years, and that those territories only held out thanks to Kasha and the funds drawn from the group. He sips a bit more tea and points out that those regions have completely lost the ability to pay off their debts to Armen. The noble states they only need to smuggle out the most important figures and recover the shares before Palvan and Chever fully collapse. Hearing her boss's strategic plan, Agnes serves more tea and calmly remarks on how sneaky he can be. Edward plays up the drama, asking if she really sees him that way, claiming he's just fulfilling the duty of any model noble. From Armen setting jokes aside, Agnes asks seriously if it's really safe to let Kasha live in peace after everything that went down. Edward gives a calm smile and replies that the warrior from before no longer exists. Now being known only as Elric Portman, Agnes warns about the risk of revenge if he recovers, saying they should have taken his head off right at the start of the strategic plan. Edward recalls how Kasha managed to block a supersonic bullet in an instant with a mana shield, saving his own knee from being destroyed. Furthermore, Edward comments it would have been a waste to end him, and that everything worked out better this way, leaving Agnes curious about the meaning of that. He explains that Elric is a mercenary body and soul, very similar to himself in some aspects, but with one crucial difference, and asks if she knows what it is. Edward reveals that the young man doesn't act solely out of self-interest, pointing out that that is definitely not a typical trait for a mercenary. With that, the Duke confesses to having decided that if the young man really is that type of guy, he'll keep him completely under his thumb, right in the palm of his hand. With his departure from the battlefields, the war will soon stall, and several kingdoms will need military funds, coming straight to tap the EW group's door. Agnes understands that Kasha's existence will serve as a counterweight on the scales of war, allowing the president to control everything and stack up even more wealth. Edward widens his eyes, shining with pride and admiration for the fast, logical reasoning displayed by his secretary. He shouts excitedly that she hit the nail on the head and declares he simply loves the fact that his dear Agnes is such a smart, sharp person. He moves forward, asking her to step closer so he can give her a warm, celebratory hug. In immediate response, the young president ends up taking a violent smack right in the middle of his face from his serious staff member. Agnes tells him to stop with the nonsense and sternly warns she won't go easy on him just because he's a young man. Meanwhile, a new sunny, peaceful day begins to break over the Portman family's lovely grand mansion. Rhonda helps Elric get dressed and asks if the clothing is too tight or uncomfortable, but he calmly answers that everything is great. Leaving the room, Elric starts talking about a previous matter with the housekeeper, but the two stop walking as soon as they spot Tyria arriving. Tyria stutters, completely embarrassed upon seeing him, and calls him master of the house. Instantly remembering last night's kiss, Elric also gets quite flustered and stutters back, calling her my lady with his heart pounding hard. Rhonda smiles with heavy mischief and butts into the conversation, teasingly asking what the young lady would like to discuss. Completely red from embarrassment, Tyria simply turns around and runs down the mansion hallway as fast as she can. Elric scratches the back of his neck, totally awkwarded out by the scene, while the housekeeper glances at him. Amused by all that shyness, Rhonda asks if they had a fight and comments that she had been super happy hearing rumors that the mood between them was plenty passionate at the festival. He defends himself, saying they were just pressured by Bart, but the housekeeper quickly notices he indirectly confirmed the passionate part. Desperately trying to switch topics, the young man asks who the important person expected at the mansion that day was Rhonda, then professionally explains that a merchant delegation coming directly from the Western Kingdoms is about to arrive. Upon hearing that the delegation comes from there, the young man's look instantly turns serious and sharp. She reports that Wibbin's wheat is so valuable, it draws annual delegations, and that this time even the Kingdom of Armen entered the bid to buy the harvest. Elric worries about the chance of being recognized by someone from the delegation, fearing the territory might be ruined over old grudges against him. Rhonda mentions that normally Lady Tyria would handle this, but decides the young master should go in person, wishing him a safe trip. Already at the busy train station, Aldio notices his boss's tension and asks the young master not to be so nervous about the meeting. The old man advises him to just greet the guests the way he taught him, receiving a sincere thanks from Elric. He takes a deep breath, trying to calm down, thinking that nobody who knew him in combat would come to that remote region just to negotiate wheat. Elric adjusts his clothes and looks at the hidden dagger, praying internally that using that weapon won't be necessary. At that exact moment, the noise of the approaching train echoes throughout the station, announcing the arrival of the long-awaited delegation. Passengers begin stepping off the train in an orderly fashion and walk toward the exit platform. With a firm posture, Elric greets the delegation members on behalf of House Portman and officially welcomes them all to Wibbin. He mentions he prepared carriages to transport them to the property, but freezes upon looking at one visitor's face. The man from the delegation falls into complete despair and panic, pointing a shaking finger and asking in fear if the young man could be Kasha himself. Back in the study in Armen, Duke Edward hears strange movement outside and asks in surprise who just arrived. He runs hurriedly down the massive hallway alongside Agnes, commenting that the mysterious visitor arrived without any notice whatsoever. The grand gates of the main meeting room are thrown open abruptly, revealing who was waiting for them inside. Edward opens his arms with extreme joy and warmly greets the newcomer, calling her by the nickname Sister Egret. It's Valentina, known as the Egret Flame, a very serious young redhead who is one of the main shareholders in the organization. He lifts her into the air very affectionately and jokes that she seems to have grown quite a bit since the last time they saw each other. Valentina stares at him with an extremely furious glare and menacingly orders him to put her down before she decides to burn him alive. The young man gets completely terrified by her fury and immediately obeys the command, apologizing in a very clumsy manner. Bluntly, she asks if he finally found Kasha's whereabouts, complaining that many days have passed since she made the request. Edward tries to justify himself, saying the warrior is hidden like a ghost, making the task of locating him very difficult. She rants furiously, threatening to pull all her shares from the group, while the president goes into panic, begging her not to do that. Valentina pinches his cheek hard and orders that if he doesn't want the shares pulled, he needs to find the legendary warrior soon. After giving her final warning, the young redhead turns her back authoritatively, making her long dark cloak flutter through the air. With the motion, Valentina displays an extremely focused, serious expression, determined to get what she wants by any means possible. Valentina warns she won't give him much time and demands he at least find out where Kasha is, receiving a submissive, affirmative response from the young man next. The young shareholder steps out of the meeting room with a firm stride and slams the large doors with extreme force on her way out. Agnes asks if he actually intends to reveal the warrior's whereabouts, but Edward replies he'd never do that, fearing the worst should those two meet. Shifting focus, the young president asks if the trade delegation was safely dispatched to the Wibbin territory. Agnes confirms it was, but confesses to having doubts whether the mercenary Kasha would take the bait on that trade proposal they put together. Edward counters with a smile that while the mercenary Kasha would refuse, Elric would be foolish not to accept the irresistible offer he crafted specifically. Meanwhile, the delegation train moves fast, crossing the extensive golden crop fields of the Wibbin region. Inside the cabin, members of the delegation remain in a tense silence, exchanging only a few discreet, suspicious glances. Aldio accompanies the visitors closely, carefully observing the tense, reserved posture the two foreigners display during the journey. One of the delegation nobles keeps a rigid, thoughtful expression, clearly worried about something he hasn't revealed to anyone yet. The locomotive finally stops at the train station's main platform, releasing a large cloud of smoke under the grand structure. The members of the important delegation begin stepping down the train steps to kick off formal trade negotiations. Elric walks firmly to meet the group alongside Aldio, offering official greetings on behalf of his entire Portman family. The young man politely adds that he's already arranged comfortable carriages to take them directly to the family mansion. At that exact moment, one of the men in the delegation stutters in panic as he faces the young noble up close, seeming to recognize his face. The man drops into despair while Elric internally groans, failing to understand why he had to run into that exact person in this place. The young noble realizes that if his true identity is exposed, the entire Wibben territory will face immense danger of destruction. The terrified visitor demands the train turn around immediately, but Elric steps in calmly, apologizing for the late introduction. He friendly introduces himself as Elric Portman, the current head of the Portman family and lawful ruler of the entire Wibben territory. The foreign noble gets confused by the name and wonders if that friendly young man really isn't the feared warrior. Kasha. Elric smiles stupidly and asks if he's okay, making the visitor conclude that Kasha would never act in such a silly, harmless way. The man recalls that the true sword demon he personally met 5 years ago was completely different from all of this. In the flashback, he remembers the day he ended up humblingly knocked to the floor by an extremely strong, intimidating young man. The incident took place in the middle of a noble hall packed with guests who began whispering and gossiping over the widespread scene. All of high society present watched the scene in complete shock and terror at the bold nerve of that unknown warrior flat on the ground. The noble shouted furiously, asking how a nobody of unknown origin had the nerve to commit such insolence. He kept ranting about his influential family, while the warrior simply took off his gloves slowly and menacingly. Out of patience for long speeches, the young man slapped the noble across the face with his own glove, surprising everyone with the direct challenge with a cold glare. The young warrior demanded to settle that insult to their honor through a traditional sword duel. The noble accepted the challenge in a rage and ordered the guards to bring 2 swords to teach that insolent kid some manners. However, Elvers Graham suddenly appeared in his wheelchair, demanding that the two stop that madness immediately. The young warrior looked back upon hearing his superior's voice, keeping the same icy, expressionless face as always. Elvers offered formal apologies on his companion's behalf, appealing to the noble's generosity, but the man furiously declared it was already too late. Faced with the noble's refusal, Elvers raised his voice, sternly ordering Kasha to offer an immediate apology to Lord Polo for his behavior. It was at that exact moment that Lord Polo heard the codename Kasha for the first time, the terrifying sword demon no one dared challenge. He remembers with horror the bloodthirsty, terrifying look the young warrior directed at him right after having his codename revealed. Back to the present, the visitor convinces himself he just blew things out of proportion and agrees to travel along with Elric, who relievedly celebrates the cover-up. Lord Polo observes the young man's friendly smile with suspicion and anger, feeling tormented just by the memory of that past shortly after. The luxurious carriage carrying the nobles continues down the dirt road under the stunning golden light of the setting sun. The driver alerts the passengers that they are finally approaching the Portman mansion and asks everyone to start getting ready. Upon arriving at the main entrance, Tyria and the housemaids wait patiently to welcome the important guests. Tyria introduces herself with a lovely, friendly smile and offers official greetings to the entire delegation from the Western powers. The young lady very kindly suggests that the visitors rest in their rooms first to recover from the travel fatigue. Next, she asks Rhonda to guide the delegation members to their reserved rooms, receiving an immediate response from her employee. In the middle of the quiet night, a series of calm knocks at the door begins echoing through the room reserved for one of the foreign guests. Sitting in his armchair, Lord Polo finds the noise strange at that late hour and wonders aloud if it might be room service. He walks calmly toward the door, grumbling about the unnecessary disturbance in the middle of his precious rest time. The man opens the door, angrily stating he doesn't need anything and doesn't want to be bothered, but freezes upon seeing who's there before him. Elric appears with red eyes and darkly warns that he deeply regrets the intrusion. Calling the noble by his name, Lord Polo falls backward in complete despair and panic upon coming face to face with the overwhelming, terrifying presence of the real Kasha. Lord Polo points a shaking finger and stutters in panic upon recognizing that look, being absolutely certain he really is the sword demon, Kasha. He shouts desperately from inside the room that he'd recognize that icy look anywhere, reaffirming that the young man is indeed the feared warrior of the past. Realizing there's no more point in pretending, Elric steps forward firmly and warns that since things reached this point, he won't hide anymore. Lord Polo crawls back and asks what he wants, desperately claiming he already offered sincere apologies for everything that happened in the past between them. Elric sits down calmly in an armchair and asks if he's referring to the day he decided to insult his person and his entire family in front of the nobles. The young noble looks at him seriously and coldly points out that he can't recall at any point accepting those cheap apologies back then. Elric asks if the noble is going to stay sprawled on the floor and invites him to sit and talk business, leaving the visitor startled by that sudden proposal. He calls him by his full name, Lord Polo D. Notum, and directly asks if the goal of his trip wasn't precisely to negotiate the purchase of all of Wibbin's wheat. The two nobles finally settle into the room's luxurious armchairs, kicking off a conversation with an extremely tense atmosphere full of mutual distrust. Lord Polo swallows hard and keeps his eyes wide open, watching with deep apprehension every small movement or change in expression. Elric opens the negotiation, casually commenting that he had an important meeting with Lord Oogle before even deciding to head up to that room. The visitor stutters, wanting to know the content of that conversation, and the young house leader directly reveals that Lord Oogle just made him a great offer. Polo asks apprehensively if Lord Oogle's delegation offered to buy the entirety of Wibbin's whole wheat harvest all at once. Showing concern, Elric confirms they did, and explains that according to Armin's proposal, all the purchased wheat would be distributed by them across the vast western region of the continent. He adds that a generous sales and distribution commission would be duly passed back to fill the coffers of the Portman family itself. However, the young man points out there was only one single requirement to follow, which would be selling the entire harvest exclusively to the kingdom of Armin. Elric remembers Oogil saying goodbye, stating he trusted the new head of the house would know how to make the smartest, most profitable decision for his territory. Oogil wrapped up the conversation calling him by his surname with a cynical smile, making it crystal clear he had full confidence he'd close that deal. Upon hearing all the details of the competing proposal, Lord Polo slams his hands on the table in fury and curses the kingdom of Armin's nerve. He rants, saying the rivals were staying quiet because they were planning everything behind their backs, calling Oogle a total backstabbing snake for acting like that. Facing that rage, Elric calmly suggests that Lord Polo close the deal with him once and for all, leaving the visitor quite surprised by the offer he proposes selling all the wheat to the Empire, provided they cover the exact same high purchase price and terms that the Kingdom of Armin had offered. Polo hesitates and explains that despite being the Empire's supply officer, he lacks sufficient authority to accept such a high price on his own. Elric then proposes that if the deal is closed, he will accept the old apologies and won't hold any more resentment or past grudges between them. Polo starts breaking out in a cold sweat under the implicit psychological pressure Elric applies by staring at him intently out of the corner of his eye, knowing his life is on the line. The visitor asks to drop the value to 60% of Armin's offer, but Elric replies that such a huge cut would be way too harsh for a family head. Polo gets even more nervous with the young man's firm refusal, knowing he needs to secure that wheat supply for the Empire no matter what. He then offers 70% of the value, guaranteeing the Empire itself will handle taking care of all shipping costs and customs fees. Elric firmly counters and demands 75% of the value under the same excellent terms of free shipping offered previously. Faced with the young man's persistence, the visitor agrees to the counteroffer, and the two seal the major deal with a final handshake. Elric thanks him for the good business, and the Lord remarks in amazement that he must be the first merchant to pull off such a favorable deal from the Empire. However, Lord Polo grows curious and asks for what reason the ex-mercenary chose to negotiate with him instead of the Kingdom of Armin's envoy. Elric stares at him seriously and mentally answers that he chose to close with him simply due to considering him an extremely easy target to manipulate. Out loud, Elric lies, saying it's because they already knew each other from the past, making the noble laugh awkwardly as he remembers all the old mess. Elric takes advantage of the friendly mood to warn he has just one final request to make. Receiving the visitor's full immediate backing and agreement, the young man warns seriously about the danger if rumors were to spread around that the sword demon Kasha was spotted living freely in the Wibbin territory. With a deadly look, Elric cautions that if those rumors spread because of him, the contract they just signed will be rewritten in blood. The visitor freezes in total terror at the explicit death threat and agrees by nodding his head frantically to guarantee his silence. The next day, all delegation members gather around a large dining table in the main hall to hear the family's official announcement. Tyria takes the floor with a radiant smile on her face and communicates to everyone present that House Portman decided to trade its wheat harvest with the Empire. Elric watches the scene from afar with a subtle smile of satisfaction, quite pleased with the perfect progress of his entire strategic plan. Sitting at the table, Armin's competing lord politely applauds and congratulates Lord Polo on the major commercial victory they just secured. Suddenly, Lord Oogle slams his hands on the table in a rage and cuts the celebration short, yelling in heavy outrage that the whole thing is a complete absurdity. The man rants, looking straight at Tyria, demanding explanations and asking if she hasn't heard anything about the housemaster's decisions. The young lady maintains her calm posture and answers with a sarcastic smile that everything happening there aligns with her husband's wishes. Ugil arrogantly insists, asking if she has any clue how ridiculous that negotiation is, but she corrects him, stating her official title is wife. The Imperial envoy gets completely confused. Failing to understand Tyria's sudden correction in the middle of his outraged rant, she proudly introduces herself as Tyria Weben Portman, the lawful wife and loyal companion of the current head of the house standing right by her side. Tyria stares at him firmly and points out seriously that a delegation member continuing to use the incorrect title to address her is a grave offense. Visibly embarrassed and intimidated by the young woman's firm stance, Lord Oogle fixes his posture and formally apologizes, calling her wife Tyria Wibben. Lord Polo lets out a scoffing chuckle at the situation, while Lord Oogle grits his teeth in pure rage over the public humiliation. Watching the heated argument finally come to an end, Elric lets out a long sigh of relief, glad to have put the issue to rest. Out in the courtyard, Elric orders the guards to escort the guests to the train station with complete safety, getting an immediate confirmation from the coachman. From inside the carriage, Lord Polo gives a friendly nod and holds up the signed document, showing his gratitude for the smooth deal. Elric returns the gesture with a serious nod, keeping a firm posture as he watches the foreign visitors take their leave. Standing beside Tyria, the young noble quietly watches the carriage drive away down the dirt road through the Weben wheat fields. With a smile, he mentions that he sees her in a whole new light now, confessing he had no idea his lovely wife had such a firm and decisive side. Tyria proudly closes her eyes and simply replies that she merely stuck to telling the absolute truth during the meeting. She shoots back with a knowing smile that the head of the house himself turned out to be extremely sharp, leaving the young man completely caught off guard by the compliment. She reveals that when Polo handed her the contract, she noticed the terms being read were quite different, proving the deal was actually great for the family. He admits he found Armin's envoy far too arrogant and wanted to bruise his pride, earning his wife's cheerful approval for such a brilliant move. Tyria suggests they head inside the manor, and her husband readily agrees, walking side by side with her toward the main entrance. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the grand and lavish manor of the EW group, located in the heart of the prosperous kingdom of Armin. Suddenly, a piercing scream of pure desperation and outrage echoes loudly from behind the grand, decorated doors of the main office. Edward comes sprinting down the hallway in a total frenzy, clutching his head and shouting at the top of his lungs, completely unable to accept what just happened. He fumes, complaining that Elric rejected his perfect offer to buy out all the wheat at a high profit margin, while Agnes just watches him in silence. The chairman throws a fit, saying the guy just had to take the easy money, but his secretary patiently asks him to calm down. Edward throws a dramatic tantrum in midair, whining about whether the former mercenary really had to ruin all his flawless plans. In the middle of all that wild, over-the-top hysteria, the young man awkwardly slips on the smooth floor in his fancy dress shoes. He completely loses his balance and goes tumbling backward toward the floor, terrified of the painful impact about to hit him. But with incredible speed and precision, Agnes shoots her hand out and grabs her boss's arm tightly to prevent a disaster. Edward is stunned to feel the sudden yank in midair, saved from a painful crash at the very last second. His loyal secretary catches him in a firm, protective embrace, using her own body to cushion the blow and keep him safe. The two of them end up sliding together across the waxed floor of the great hallway. Kicking up a small cloud of dust from the sudden stop, Agnes snaps at him, demanding the chairman pull himself together once and for all, while he offers an awkward apology for the trouble. A short while later, a fresh cup of hot, aromatic tea is gently served to soothe the young duke's frayed nerves. Agnes asks if he has finally managed to calm down a bit, and the young man thanks his secretary for her thoughtfulness. While enjoying the drink, Edward reflects that, given his past as Kasha, he never expected him to negotiate with the Empire, admitting the guy completely exceeded all his expectations. Agnes suggests that whenever you want to find out someone's true intentions, the best way is almost always to ask them directly. The chairman pauses in silence for a moment before agreeing that going there and asking directly really is the only viable way out. Determined to take action, he says that in that case, he will need a solid excuse to break the ice. He slides open a hidden drawer in his desk and pulls out a revolver, planning to use it as the perfect pretext for his business visit. The scene shifts to the luxurious grand residence of Elvers Graham. A crucial former ally of the MC during his battle days, Elvers welcomes Lord Polo into his office and notes he heard he traveled from afar, while the visitor asks him to take a look at something first. The host, sitting in his wheelchair, takes the rolled-up parchment and curiously asks what that mysterious document is all about. Polo reveals that the letter was sent personally by Elric Portman, leaving the war veteran stunned to hear his old friend's real name. Elvers unrolls the yellowed paper with his gloved hands and begins reading the handwritten words of the former warrior with rapt attention. He analyzes every detail of the message with a deeply serious and focused expression, trying to decipher the true intentions behind the text. All of a sudden, the veteran ends up spitting out his tea in absolute shock at what he just read. Leaving the visitor completely bewildered by the reaction, Elvers slaps a hand over his face and bursts into loud, genuine laughter, thoroughly amused by the unexpected content of that letter. Still laughing, he remarks that he had been wondering who Elric Portman was, adding that Polo must have gotten the scare of his life finding out the guy was actually Kasha, still getting a huge kick out of the unusual situation. The host warmly thanks the visitor for taking the trouble to deliver that letter in person. Polo informs him that his job there is done, and politely takes his leave to start his trip back, receiving warm wishes for a safe journey from Elvers left alone. The veteran looks at the paper with nostalgia, reflecting that his friend headed to Wibbon after vanishing out of nowhere, noting that winter must be setting in over there. Far away from there, the scene shifts to the icy, snow-covered mountains of a dense forest, where a harsh winter has already arrived in full force. The barrel of an impressive hunting rifle is aimed steadily through the frozen trees against the howling cold wind of that wilderness. A clean shot rings out, and the young hunter cheers excitedly alongside his companions over the absolute success of that perfect hit. The boys rush over to the fallen deer in the snow and celebrate the size of their prize, commenting that they are finally no longer mere rookies. One of them suggests bringing the horses over to help haul the massive animal back, but Derek the hunter suddenly stops dead in his tracks, freezing in shock. His friend yells at Derek to stop stalling and go grab the horses already. Puzzled by his companion's paralyzed reaction and sudden silence, Derek presses a finger to his lips, giving a crystal-clear sign for his two companions to stay completely silent. Derek tells them both to back away from the kill right this second, leaving his friends utterly confused by the sudden reaction. He asks if they do not feel an eerie chill in the air, and says a demonic beast must be nearby, insisting they get out of there. His friend thinks it is a joke and says of course it is cold because it is winter, telling Derek to just go get the horses once and for all. Out of nowhere, a massive roar shatters the air right in front of them, and his friends try to calm Derek down while falling into absolute panic themselves. Derek aims his weapon with shaking hands and screams at the idiots to get out of the way, because there is something right behind them. That is when the giant head of a monster emerges right above them, leaving all three young men completely frozen in terror. A massive wolf with glowing blue eyes and razor-sharp fangs snarls viciously, revealing itself to be a terrifying magical beast. The scene cuts to the grand and luxurious Portman family manor, standing tall under the cloudy winter sky of the region. Tyria is deeply shaken by the situation, commenting that she can barely process everything she just heard from them. The three surviving hunters drop to their knees before her, confessing that they fled the scene consumed by absolute terror. Tyria acknowledges they have been through a lot, offers them hot tea, and promises to discuss the matter with the head of the family. She asks Rhonda to serve the young men a hearty meal and hot tea, and the housekeeper promptly accepts the request. Shortly after, the loyal butler Aldio grabs a massive ancient tome on magical creatures, known as the Encyclopedia of Monsters. Aldio walks through the library with his lady, explaining that based on the hunter's accounts and the entries in the old book. He states with absolute gravity that the mysterious creature that attacked the hunters in the woods appears to be a blade wolf. Tyria grows worried about the return of a demonic beast, but Aldio notes that the evidence points to it. Even if they had vanished in the past, Tyria asks if the alpha of this pack was the one that left the scar on Elric's neck, and Aldio confirms it was a terribly dangerous time. Overwhelmed by a mix of dread and fury, as she remembers that, Tyria clenches her fists tightly in front of the butler. She firmly declares that she will organize a subjugation squad, as she will not allow any villager to face the danger her husband once faced. Aldio respectfully agrees and assures her he will recruit the most skilled elite hunters in the territory for this mission. Before he steps out, Tyria calls him back, making the experienced butler turn around to hear what else she has to say. She puts a finger to her lips in a secret gesture, pleading with him to keep this entire operation hidden from the head of the house. Though a bit caught off guard by his lady's unusual request, Aldio agrees to keep the secret, promising to keep it in mind outside the manor. An elegant carriage stands ready at the entrance for the journey. The head of the family is about to make. Elric gives his wife an affectionate smile and promises to return quickly, while Tyria wishes the head of the house a safe trip. Tyria and Aldio stand at the entrance, quietly watching the carriage fade into the distance along the dirt road. Aldio asks if they should not have informed Elric, but she explains that knowing his personality, he would try to handle everything himself even while injured. Tyria gazes at the horizon with a melancholy expression, whispering to herself that he would act just like he did on that day in the past. She sorrowfully recalls when she was just a helpless child, screaming Elric's name in desperation in the middle of the forest on that terrible day. Young Elric bravely placed himself between her and a gigantic wolf to protect her from a fatal attack. Tyria reinforces that she cannot let her husband walk into danger again, asking if everything she requested for the hunt is ready. Aldio proudly confirms that he managed to gather the most experienced warriors and elite hunters from across the entire territory. Tyria praises his work and says they will resolve this before Elric returns, leaving Aldio stunned when he realizes she intends to join them. She firmly explains that since they are putting their lives on the line by her orders, accompanying them on the hunt is her solemn duty as a noble. Aldio reluctantly yields to her decision, but sets the condition that she must fall back immediately if a demonic beast shows up. Meanwhile, the scene cuts to the bustling, snow-draped streets of the commercial center in the Wibben district. Someone watches closely as a snow-covered, weathered wooden sign marks the local hospital of the small town. The doctor examines the scar on his leg, cheerfully noting that the recovery is going great and the wound is nearly healed up. Elric asks if he can stop using the walking cane now, but the doctor advises him to keep using it a bit longer just to be safe. The old man changes the subject, asking if the deep, old scar Elric has on his neck left any kind of permanent side effects. Elric gives a relaxed smile and replies that the doctor who treated his injury back then was a renowned professional. The doctor recalls how tough it was because blade wolf bites cause severe frostbite, revealing that Elric's father desperately begged for his son's life. Elric is completely stunned to hear that, wondering if his own father really begged on his knees to save him. The old doctor gestures, commenting that it was an unforgettable scene, as he had never seen the Lord of the Land look so pale with pure terror. Elric lets out a bitter smirk, admitting he cannot even picture his father acting out of such desperation like that. The doctor politely says goodbye to the young noble, reminding him once more not to overexert himself over the next few days. The heavy wooden double doors of the doctor's office shut right after with a firm click, bringing the consultation to an end. Elric begins walking down the snow-draped street leaning on his cane, while a man with folded arms watches him from afar. The stranger calls out his name and asks if the medical checkup went well, making Elric stop in his tracks and look back in surprise. Elric slowly turns around and instantly recognizes the guy's face, gasping out Leuten's name in disbelief. Leuten smiles excitedly upon seeing his friend and calls him Captain, happily confirming that he really did return to Wibben. The two childhood friends share a joyful hug, and Leuten mentions he rushed over. The moment he received Elric's letter, Elric asks about the news that his friend joined the Royal Knights, and Leuten proudly shows off the sword gifted to him by royalty. Leuten suggests going for a drink to catch up, and Elric happily accepts the offer, saying the first round is on him all of a sudden. A messenger comes running over out of breath with an urgent letter, making Leuten annoyed that his day off is being ruined. The breathless messenger reveals that it is an urgent distress request sent directly from the Portman family itself. Hearing his own family's name in the call for help, Elric freezes in shock and demands to know immediately what is happening. The tense messenger explains that the person in grave danger is Lady Tyria Wibben, Elric's own wife. The news that his beloved wife was ambushed by a demonic beast makes Elric's eyes flare with fury and worry. Far from there, the deafening sound of gunfire echoes loudly through the icy mountains beneath an unforgiving blizzard. Two blade wolves with glowing eyes race at breakneck speed through the deep snow, fiercely pursuing the hunting party. One of the elite hunters takes position quickly and fires a precise shot at the approaching monster. The clean shot hits one of the giant wolves square in the head, sending the creature bleeding to the snow-covered ground. The hunters yell to take careful aim while two of them take charge of escorting the terrified Tyria toward safer ground. Tyria's young attendant points through the frozen trees and shouts that there is an abandoned cabin just up ahead. Marie urges her mistress to hurry and step inside the cabin while the hunters keep fighting the beasts outside. One of the brave warriors ignites a glowing magical stone that shines intensely, casting a bright blue light through the forest. He sprints away from the cabin, explaining that the stone's energy will draw the monster's attention and keep them away from Tyria. The strategy works like a charm, and the entire pack of hungry wolves starts charging toward the blue light. Far away from the two women inside the dark, freezing cabin, Tyria and Marie huddle beneath the blankets, trembling from extreme cold and fear over what is unfolding. Tyria apologizes for putting her friend in danger, but Marie tells her not to say that, as she was the one who insisted on coming along. Marie tries to comfort her, asking her to hold on just a bit longer, since a distress signal was sent and help should arrive soon. Tyria gives a relieved smile, remarking that at least she is glad she kept it a secret, avoiding putting her injured husband in harm's way. Seeing her mistress's kindness and constant worry for her husband, young Marie cannot hold back her tears and cries from emotion. Cutting to the open fields, Elric and Luyten ride their horses at full speed through the heavy blizzard battering the mountain region. Elric worries anxiously, wondering why Tyria decided to tackle something so dangerous all by herself. Asking himself if she found him unreliable, Luyten shouts Elric's name at the top of his lungs to pull him out of his deep thoughts and get him to focus on the trail ahead. Luyten tells him to stay calm and promises they will save Tyria no matter what, earning a sincere thank you from his friend for the support Luyten remembers back when he was a kid. Running and crying in desperation while screaming his best friend's name through the forest, he vividly recalls the moment Elric put himself on the line alone to buy time for the others to escape from the terrifying alpha wolf. Back then, he apologized through tears as he ran to get help as fast as possible to save the friend left behind. Determined to change the past, Luyten swears to himself that he will never let his brave captain fight danger alone ever again. One of the surviving hunters spots the two riders approaching through the blizzard and starts shouting and waving to signal his location. The second they pull up, Elric leaps off his horse and sprints toward the hunter, ignoring Luyten's shouts for him to wait. Desperate, Elric asks where his wife is, and the hunter hastily replies that she is safe, hiding out in a nearby cabin. The guy adds that his other companions ended up cornered while trying to lure the beasts away to save the lady. Elric lets out a tense sigh of relief and asks the hunter to lead him to the spot so he can rescue the men in danger. However, Luyten grabs Elric's shoulder firmly from behind, telling his friend he shouldn't do that, taking the ex-mercenary by surprise. Luyten says he will go save the hunters and tells Elric to hurry and go check on his wife, but Elric hesitates, asking if he will be fine facing the wolves. With a highly confident smile on his face, Luyten asks his friend to trust him, as he is no longer the timid, scared kid from the past. Elric offers a proud smile and nods, stating that Luyten has truly become a genuine, honorable knight of the realm. Luyten and the hunter take off toward the forest to save the other men who acted as bait for the beasts. Elric watches them leave for a brief moment and decides he needs to hurry as fast as possible to reunite with his beloved wife. He sprints at top speed through the dense forest, battling the harsh blizzard that impairs his vision along the way. His feet sink deep into the soft snow with every rushed step, but he ignores the exhaustion and extreme cold to keep pushing forward. Shielding his eyes from the biting wind, he curses the storm for picking up so suddenly, praying that everyone is safe and sound. Finally, Elric catches sight of the outline of the small, abandoned wooden cabin covered in snow in the middle of the frozen woods, breathing a sigh of relief. He shoves the old wooden door open with considerable force, letting the icy wind and snow from the storm rush into the dark space. Glancing into the dim interior of the cabin, Elric begins frantically calling out for Tyria, praying she answers his call. Tyria and Marie are utterly stunned to see Elric standing there, and his wife stammers out, asking why he showed up in a place like this. Without saying a single word, Elric strides quickly toward Tyria and pulls her into an extremely tight, relief-filled embrace. Still blushing heavily and taken aback by the sudden physical contact, Tyria asks once more why the head of the house came all the way out here. Elric simply squeezes her shoulders even tighter, letting all the immense worry he had been carrying wash over. He tells her that Line belongs to him, asking in frustration why she pulled off something so dangerous without checking with him first, leaving her speechless. Gazing down with a guilty expression, Tyria quietly confesses that she only did it because she did not want to put his life at risk. Elric looks at her with deep sorrow, asking if she truly saw him as someone so unreliable that she felt the need to hide everything from him. Tyria frantically tries to deny it, saying that is not what she meant, but she is cut off by Elric, who pulls her into another embrace. He says he is so relieved she is okay, but gently begs her to never throw herself into danger like that alone, ever again. Feeling the warmth of his chest, Tyria closes her eyes happily and promises her husband she will never do anything like that again without telling him first. Standing nearby, young Marie watches the romantic moment of the two making up and smiles from ear to ear, feeling immensely relieved. Suddenly, heavy, rushed footsteps begin echoing from outside the cabin. Instantly catching both Elric's and Tyria's attention, Marie looks excitedly through the crack of the door and happily announces to her master and mistress that the hunters managed to return safely. Elric smiles, noting they were quite fast, and sincerely thanks all the warriors for their hard work out in the forest. However, as he takes a closer look at the group that just arrived, Elric's expression suddenly shifts, and he asks everyone to wait a second. He asks point blank where Leighton is, and one of the hunters avoids eye contact with a deeply tense look, hesitating before he speaks. The hunter explains that Leighton stayed behind alone to face the pack of beasts so they could escape, giving strict orders for them to run. Elric grits his teeth in frustration at the news and curses under his breath, calling Leighton an idiot for pulling a crazy stunt like that again. Elric orders the hunters to escort Tyria and Marie off the mountain immediately, letting them know he will personally go bring Leighton back. The moment he turns to leave, Tyria grabs her husband's sleeve. Elric stops dead in his tracks and looks back, surprised to find his wife stopping him from moving forward. With tears in her eyes, she confesses she is terrified of him getting hurt and begs him to promise he will return safe and sound to her. Elric gently places his hand over hers, sincerely thanking her for all that care and asking her to just trust him. He offers a deeply tender smile and formally promises to bring Leighton back and return safely right back into her arms afterward. Tyria sheds a few more tears and firmly warns him that she will never forgive him if he breaks that promise and gets hurt. With a slight nod and a confident smile, Elric warmly accepts the warning, promising to keep that commitment firmly in mind. Meanwhile, in the middle of the frozen woods, the paws of several blade wolves race through the deep snow, surrounding their opponent. One of the wolves leaps viciously toward him, but Leighton plants his feet firmly with his royal sword in hand, ready for direct combat. With a swift, precise slash of his blade, the knight slices the monster in half mid-air, spraying blood across the surrounding snow. However, Leighton is completely exhausted and battered, blood dripping down his face and armor from his previous injuries. Looking ahead with difficulty, he realizes there are still several other hungry wolves circling the area, getting ready to pounce on him. Leighton lets out a desperate, bloody laugh, admitting to himself that he really did not expect there to be so many dangerous beasts around. He realizes he has lost way too much blood from the deep gashes. Feeling his vision start to darken and grow blurry, Leighton drops to his knees from exhaustion and shouts proudly, taking comfort in the fact that at least Knight Leighton will have the honor of passing away in his homeland. He weakly gestures toward the monsters and wonders why they do not just attack already, admitting he no longer has the strength to even lift his sword. One of the massive beasts snaps open its maw full of razor-sharp teeth and begins snarling right in front of him, getting ready to land the final blow. The wolf leaps with blind fury toward the defenseless young man, roaring loudly as it prepares to sink its lethal fangs into the royal knight's neck. Leighton simply closes his eyes in resignation and accepts his final fate, patiently awaiting the violent bite that will end his life out of nowhere. The deafening sound of a rifle shot echoes through the woods, and the head of the attacking wolf explodes instantly. Leighton opens the one eye he can manage and wonders in shock where that clean shot came from, thinking maybe the hunters had returned. Elric steps out of the blizzard holding a long gun, dryly commenting that his friend looks terrible for a royal knight, leaving Leighton dumbfounded. Elric says the weapon has good firepower but is not quite his style, and reassures Leighton by telling him Tyria is completely safe in the cabin. As the pack of hungry monsters starts closing in from behind, Elric mentions he has a bit of a tough favor to ask his friend Elric, points with determination, and reveals that the unusual favor he wants to ask for is the very knight's sword Leighton is holding in his hands. He calmly asks if he could borrow the blade for just a few minutes to settle things with the wolves once and for all. Leighton hands over the hilt of the sword without hesitation, replying that if it is for his dear captain, he would be willing to lend his very life. However, the knight warns that it is a genuine, heavy weapon, completely different from the old wooden swords they used as kids. Elric simply brushes off the warning and executes a few incredibly fast, fluid motions with the sword in the air. Leaving his friend speechless, Elric asks if Luyten is still curious about what he was up to during the 10 years he was away. He steps forward firmly toward the beasts and promises to show him everything in person, for his friend to watch right there. The terrifying blade wolves roar with hatred and prepare to tear apart the noble intruder who dared to challenge them in the blizzard. Elric begins concentrating a massive amount of blue mana energy into his free hand, commenting on how sensitive the wolves are. He confirms that they really do react to mana, as the monsters charge like crazy toward that surging, glowing power. The entire pack rushes at him with fury, but the former mercenary stays completely calm and focused right at the center of the onslaught. With a movement so blazing fast it is invisible to the naked eye, Elric vanishes from his spot, kicking up a wall of snow. He pulls off lightning-fast slashes that dice the monsters one by one before they even have time to react or defend themselves. Another giant wolf is sliced in half instantly under the lethal, precise force of his technique using Luyten's blade. Luyten watches the whole thing in awe, thinking that while he has no idea what his friend went through in those 10 missing years, he knows with absolute certainty that the relentless warrior standing before him is no longer the fragile little captain he knew in his childhood. Elric keeps up his deadly combat, striking down another beast from behind with impressive ease and precision. Maintaining a cold, laser-focused expression, he executes another devastating horizontal slash that clears out the surrounding monsters. In a single, monumental sweeping strike, the ex-mercenary manages to obliterate dozens of fierce wolves all at once. He raises his free hand toward the sky and gathers a colossal amount of magical energy that lights up the entire frozen forest. A massive shockwave of blue mana energy bursts forth all at once, blowing everything nearby apart with terrifying force. Elric lands firmly on his knees in the snow with style. While the bodies of the defeated beasts drop lifelessly in every direction, Luyten is left in absolute shock, his mouth hanging wide open in pure astonishment at the display of overwhelming power he just witnessed. Elric calmly turns around amidst the quiet battlefield and asks his friend what he thought of that little demonstration. Smirking casually, he asks if that was finally enough to satisfy all of the young knight's curiosity. Luyten ends up slumping back into the snow, completely exhausted and dazed, sincerely confessing that the whole thing was way too unbelievable. He admits with a blank, tired look that he actually ended up even more confused about who his friend became over those 10 years. Back at the cabin, Elric deeply thanks him for the help, but the modest knight pushes back, saying he barely did a thing. Covered in bandages and dressings from his wounds, Luyten chuckles, stating that the captain was the one who handled everything on his own. Elric says he could not have wrapped things up without his initial help, taking the opportunity to ask for one more very special favor from his friend. The knight cheerfully responds that he already owes his life to his friend twice over, insisting he does not need to ask for favors, just give orders. Elric asks him to take full credit for the hunt to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Leaving Luyten utterly shocked by the proposal, Elric explains he has his personal reasons for it and asks for his friend's help, who hesitates a bit, thinking the whole thing feels way too unfair. Though reluctant, Luyten ultimately lets out a long sigh and decides to agree to the unusual request out of respect and loyalty to his captain. Shortly after, in a town square, the local leader announces Luyten as the great hero of Wibben to the applause and cheers of the crowd. The man warmly thanks him for the incredible work, praising the knight for taking on so many fierce beasts single-handedly to save them. Deeply embarrassed by all the over-the-top attention, Luyten stammers, at a loss for words, and sheepishly looks away. He spots Elric disguised in the middle of the crowd, making a friendly shh sign with a finger to his lips to keep his cover intact. Gulping hard, the young knight takes a deep breath to convincingly play the role requested of him in front of everyone there. Luyten lies, claiming he simply acted for the peace of Wibben, and the man excitedly declares that having a knight like him is the pride of the entire kingdom. The man raises his arm and calls on the entire crowd present to give 3 cheers and warmly applaud the brave warrior who saved the town. The people burst into wild celebrations once more, chanting the name of Wibben's new hero, who took down the terrifying wolf pack. Satisfied with the plan's outcome, Elric offers a slight smirk and decides it is finally time for him to head back to his own home as well. Sometime later, the royal carriage returns and pulls up in the snow-covered courtyard of the manor, where all the servants await their arrival. The handsome black horses trot smoothly across the courtyard as they pull the family head's luxurious carriage back to its final stop. The massive, reinforced wooden wheel of the carriage grinds to a complete halt right in front of the manor's main staircase. Elric opens the door and steps down with calm strides, walking over to meet his dear wife, who was anxiously waiting for him at the entrance. Tyria greets him with a lovely smile, affectionately confessing she was starting to get worried about his unusual delay. Elric gives an awkward apology, explaining he got a bit held up only because he wanted to thank and say goodbye to his close friend Leuten. Tyria notes the lack of support and asks about his leg, making Elric remember the doctor's orders not to do any unnecessary straining. He pats his leg and reassures her with a smile that he is perfectly fine, putting his beloved wife's worried heart completely at ease. Elric's tone of voice suddenly turns a bit more serious, making the young noblewoman look at him with keen attention and curiosity. With a remarkably sweet and tender look, he affectionately asks her to never put herself in danger alone like that ever again. Blushing heavily at her husband's sweet words of concern, Tyria smiles softly and promises to keep that request close to heart. Elric suggests heading inside so they do not catch a cold, and she happily agrees as they walk together back into the manor. Elric delicately extends his gloved hand and opens the grand front door of the manor for his wife to step through. He makes a polite gesture, asking her with a bright smile to enter the warm house first. Rhonda playfully comments that spring seems to have arrived around here, and Marie teases that judging by the mood, it feels like summer. Tyria shyly thanks her husband, her face turning beet red, while he watches her with a look of pure affection. Out of nowhere, Tyria starts to stumble and loses her strength, falling forward right under Elric's terrified and desperate gaze. Elric quickly catches her in his arms, frantically crying out his wife's name and begging her to wake up immediately. A short while later, the maids hurry through the manor to arrange the emergency care their mistress desperately needs. The experienced doctor examines the young woman and gravely informs Elric that Tyria's health is in far worse shape than expected. The doctor warns that she is at risk of suffering a critical health crisis, leaving the young noble paralyzed with pure dread and panic. The doctor observes his pain and recalls that the former patriarch, Lord Hoven, had the exact same desperate look in the past. In a burst of desperation, Elric tightly grabs the doctor's shoulders to beg him to do everything humanly possible for her. He yells, pleading with the doctor to save his precious wife's life no matter what, nearly losing control of his emotions. Bowing with deep respect and empathy before the young man, the old professional solemnly promises he will do his absolute best. The doctor's carriage takes off down the icy road to fetch the necessary medications and supplies for the treatment. Elric stands frozen outside in the heavy blizzard, staring at the sky in agony as he whispers sorrowfully for his beloved. He loses all strength and collapses to his knees on the cold ground, prompting Rhonda and Marie to rush over frantically to support him in that difficult moment. Rhonda affectionately yet firmly asks him to try and stay calm, holding on to the mental strength needed during such a critical time. Later, Elric tries to eat alone in the manor's massive, quiet dining hall under the heavy atmosphere that took over the house. He stares at the plate full of food in front of him with a completely gloomy, dispirited look. Lacking the slightest appetite, Rhonda approaches respectfully, gently asking if the meal prepared is not to the head of the house's liking. Looking at the empty table, he ends up remembering with nostalgia and pain his wife's sweet, warm smile from happier days. Elric reflects with bitterness and sadness that they barely talked or truly grew close throughout the entire time they were married. He regretfully asks himself why on earth he did not try to open up and talk to her more before this health tragedy struck. Elric lets out a quiet murmur as he refocuses on his full plate, realizing just how lost in his own thoughts he really is. Rhonda and Marie trade looks of deep concern upon noticing that the young master has not touched a single bite of the food served. Rhonda clears the untouched plate and quietly walks away with quick steps, while Marie watches her sad master with a heavy heart. The maid carries the tray back to the manor's kitchen, leaving the space steeped in a gloomy, heavy silence. Marie quietly notes that usually the young master would devour all that with a huge appetite, showing just how deeply the situation has hit him. Rhonda insists he needs to eat better, but Elric apologizes, saying he simply has zero appetite given everything going on. Rhonda then suggests he take a walk through the secret garden Tyria used to visit all the time, trying to give her master a distraction. The scene reveals a breathtaking garden filled with vibrant, glowing blue roses that seem to bloom flawlessly. Even in the winter cold, Elric admires the beauty of the flowers and asks about the garden, and Rhonda confirms that Tyria took care of it with extreme love before he came back. He is amazed that flowers can bloom in winter, and Rhonda explains that love mixed with gardening magic makes any impossibility come true. Rhonda recalls that he also loved plants as a child, but the young man melancholically says that all of that is just a distant, faded memory. Elric sorrowfully reflects that nowadays his mind is no longer filled with the soft scent of his innocent childhood flowers. Instead, his thoughts are completely dominated by the horrific stench of bloody battlefields and mangled bodies from his war days. Rhonda shares that Tyria also loved plants and used to say as a child that she wanted to become an excellent doctor to help everyone who was hurt. Elric is surprised, wondering why a girl from a traditional, noble family would have the unusual childhood dream of becoming a doctor. At that moment, a mysterious old memory flashes in his mind, an image of his younger self receiving a small pouch of medicine from someone very dear. Rhonda asks if he is doing all right, and the young man rests a hand on his head, replying, he just remembered something important he had forgotten. Rhonda notes it is getting very cold and suggests heading back inside, and Elric readily agrees, walking calmly back with the loyal housekeeper. Day begins to give way as a beautiful sunset, filled with dramatic orange tones, paints the sky above the grand family manor. Later, inside the study, the butler Aldio is surprised to see his master walk in unexpectedly, asking what brings him by. Elric finds his presence odd and asks point blank why the butler is working inside his wife's personal office. Aldio points to the stack of papers and says there is a lot to review. Explaining he learned this work while serving the former patriarch, Elric gets annoyed, saying he should have helped out more, since that overwhelming workload was the reason she got sick in the first place. With total respect and seriousness, Aldio defends himself, explaining to the young master that he was merely following Tyria's strict, direct orders. Elric goes silent, sheepishly asking if there is anything he can do to help, but Aldio politely declines so he can stay focused on his duties. The young man takes his leave, mentioning he will have Rhonda bring him some hot tea, receiving the experienced butler's humble, sincere thanks. Shortly after, young Marie walks attentively down the elegant hallways of the manor. Pushing a richly decorated golden tea cart, Marie knocks gently on the bedroom door, announcing she prepared hot tea for Elric, who tells her to come in from inside. She steps into the quiet room, finding the young master sitting there with a deeply tired, melancholy look. Marie holds the tray with the teapot, looking at her master with immense worry upon noticing how drained he appears. The young servant carefully pours the fragrant, hot liquid into an elegant white porcelain cup. Marie explains with a gentle smile that she brewed the rose tea Tyria frequently enjoys, offering it to him. He stares at the rose petal floating in the cup, thoughtfully murmuring that he understands the choice of tea. Marie tries to cheer him up, asking him to hang in there, reassuring him with optimism that his wife will surely be fine soon. Elric lets out a faint smirk, apologizing to the maid for making her worry unnecessarily about his state. Marie quickly bows in a panic, clarifying she only got worried because he looked extremely down today. Quite flustered, the young servant hastily excuses herself and rushes out of the room, shutting the heavy wooden door with a click. Alone once again in the quiet of the room, Elric gazes at the steaming cup and softly whispers his wife's name. Under the glow of the full moon illuminating the night sky, a silent prayer asks for his beloved to simply return safely. The scene shows the small town's hospital during the quiet dead of night, with only one upper-floor window lit up. Inside the treatment room, the nurse notes down Tyria's condition, who is shaking with a high fever and struggling to breathe. Opening her eyes with great difficulty, Tyria thinks to herself that she cannot go on like this, bedridden and weak. Tears trickle down her feverish face as she laments that her husband will be sick with worry over her health. Noticing the patient's distress, the nurse approaches with concern, gently asking if she is feeling terrible. Drifted back to sleep by the fever, Tyria's mind begins to wander. Hearing harsh voices from her past calling out her name, some time passes, and a carriage travels swiftly across the snowy fields, bringing back an important and long-awaited passenger. Fully recovered from her severe illness, Tyria steps out of the carriage with a smile, asking if everything went well while she was away. Seeing their mistress safe and sound, Rhonda and Marie happily rush over to celebrate her long-awaited return from the bottom of their hearts. Marie hugs her mistress, crying tears of joy and saying how worried they were, while Tyria comforts her, saying she's all better now. Rhonda offers a respectful bow, expressing her immense happiness over her recovery, warmly inviting her into the manor. With eyes sparkling with anticipation and affection, Tyria smiles with a blush, wondering how her husband has been spending all these days. All of a sudden, Elric throws the manor doors open violently, bursting out winded to confirm if his beloved wife really has returned. Tyria's heart leaps with joy at the sight of him, while the young man stands breathless, his eyes wide with emotion. Elric stares at her for a brief second and shouts her name at the top of his lungs, unable to hold back the overwhelming feeling of seeing her there. He starts sprinting wildly toward her, making a startled Tyria ask him to hold on for a second. A moment later, he wraps his arms around her with everything he has, showing just how deeply he loves her. With tears streaming down his face, he whispers an apology, begging her to let him hold her tight for just a little while longer. The scene cuts to a gorgeous starry night over the Portman Manor, where the gloomy mood has finally given way to peace and quiet. Inside her bedroom, Tyria squeezes her pillow tight and happily rolls around from side to side, sighing her husband's title over and over. She flops onto her back on the soft bed with a massive smile, screaming her husband's name in her head with pure joy. Tyria buries her blushing face in the covers, remembering the sudden, tight hug she received from him in the manor courtyard. She kicks her feet wildly on the bed, thinking with a blush that her heart felt like it was going to burst from beating so fast. Out of nowhere, Marie opens the bedroom door cheerfully, announcing she brought some hot tea specially prepared for her mistress. Tyria gets a huge fright, turning red as a beet after getting caught red-handed doing that silly dance on her bed. Scrambling to regain her dignified posture, she clears her throat and invites the maid inside to serve the drink. Marie nods happily, approaching the table with the cart to pour her mistress's favorite rose tea. Marie is shocked to learn the two actually knew each other as kids, and Tyria explains that due to certain reasons, he does not remember it. Super excited and curious about her employer's romance, Marie asks with bright eyes how that first meeting of theirs went down. Tyria smiles nostalgically, sharing that he was incredibly brave, revealing he proposed to her the very first time they laid eyes on each other. Marie is stunned by Elric's youthful boldness, and Tyria laughs as she explains he jumped to conclusions and ran off before even hearing her answer. She goes on to share that fate brought them together again, that very same autumn when they unexpectedly ran into each other right at the family manor. She recalls that memorable reunion happened on the day her father came over for a business meeting with the former lord of the house. Suddenly, the painful memory of a wooden rod striking hard against a child's palm resurfaces in Tyria's mind. Little Tyria wept silently as she held out her arms to receive that harsh, painful physical punishment from her mother. Tyria's mother, cold, cruel, and relentless, delivered the blows with the rod without showing the slightest hint of pity for her daughter. The servant tried to warn her that they were at the Portman Manor and someone might see, but the shrew immediately told her to shut her mouth. Her mother glared down at her with hatred, coldly repeating her daughter's full name, sternly warning she would say this only one last time. Tyria's mother coldly states that her marriage is vital for the future of the Wibben family, saying the Nimrud family is a great match. She threatens to starve her daughter for 2 days if she dares to complain or challenge that forced marriage decision one more time. With sharp, loud footsteps, the shrew steps out of the study and slams the heavy double doors, locking the young girl inside. The family servant kneels before her, worried about the pain in her bruised hands, asking her to wait there while she fetches some medicine. The woman quickly rushes off down the hallways of the Grand Manor Library, leaving little Tyria waiting all alone. Left by herself, the girl looks at her sore hands when out of nowhere she hears an unusual noise coming from behind the bookshelves. Tyria sheds sad tears, asking herself why she is being forced to marry a mysterious man whose face she has never even seen. All at once, a large book drops onto the carpet right beside her, startling her and drawing her attention to a mysterious presence nearby. Young Elric appears crouched down, trying to pick up the book he accidentally dropped. Getting flustered upon realizing he was spotted, he sheepishly waves his hand at the girl, awkwardly mentioning that they ended up running into each other again in that spot. She stammers, asking why he is there, and Elric explains he lives at the manor since he is the owner's son, telling her she can speak normally. Curious about what he overheard her saying while crying, the boy asks who exactly she is being forced to marry. She sorrowfully explains it is not of her own free will, but an obligation imposed to save the fate of her traditional noble family. Seeing the clear pain in her eyes, young Elric asks straight up if she would like him to do something to help her out. He holds out his hand to her with determination, reassuring her that if she does not want this fate, he will figure out a way so she does not have to marry the guy. Tyria stares at him, her eyes sparkling with enchantment and her cheeks turning bright red. Completely captivated by the young boy's fearless attitude, Marie lets out a romantic squeal upon hearing their childhood story, and Tyria playfully asks if she knows where he took her. Curious and with a massive grin on her face, the maid eagerly asks where the young master took Tyria. On that memorable occasion, Elric's childhood friends take a look at the little girl he brought over, remarking with impression on how insanely pretty she is. Elric gives his playmates a proud thumbs up, saying he was not lying about his new companion's beauty. His friends tease him, asking if she was the one who rejected him, making the boy yell in annoyance that he simply had not gotten an answer yet. Tyria lets out a genuine, amused laugh at the boy's comical situation, making young Elric turn even redder from embarrassment and irritation. Elric tries to defend himself, saying it was all a plan to recruit her as the squad's doctor, asking if they have ever seen a doctor so pretty. His two childhood friends shake their heads in unison, agreeing that they have never seen anyone that pretty before. Elric declares the start of their daily patrol with the group's new reinforcement, ordering everyone to advance to the excited cheers of his companions. Sometime later, the two find themselves alone in a quiet, sunny clearing, sharing a calmer, friendlier moment. With a serious look, Elric explains local military rules stating that a soldier belongs to the army until they receive an official discharge. He explains that since she is now officially the doctor for his patrol unit, she no longer has to be forced to marry anyone. Quite shy and blushing, Elric asks if she will give her final answer to his marriage proposal if he manages to become a royal knight. Marie lets out another thrilled squeal at the reveal, commenting that the young master really had zero intention of giving up on that girl. Tyria nods in agreement, laughing as she mentions that since his friends came rushing back suddenly, she was unable to give him a proper answer. She shares that after that, they spent the rest of the day playing and running freely across the territory's sunny hills and fields. In their innocent game, the boys pointed at a harmless squirrel, shouting that the demonic beast was planning to attack their village. The four of them ran around laughing hysterically behind the small, frightened animal, having a blast with that fun imaginary hunt. Tyria shares that thanks to him, she discovered for the very first time in her life how much fun a single day of simple play could be. Elric had proudly pointed to a large, rustic structure, announcing to his new doctor that it was the squad's secret hideout. She looked in wonder at the wooden cabin, it being the first time she had ever seen such a rustic, interesting structure in her life. The boy asked if it wasn't cool, promising that once he became a royal knight, he would build a beautiful training facility right in that exact spot. The other two friends yelled that they were going inside the cabin first and sprinted over, leaving the young couple talking a bit further behind. Elric seized the moment alone to pull something from his clothes, holding out a small, rustic drawstring pouch toward her as a gift. He carefully placed the small pouch onto Tyria's gloved palms, who received it with surprise and curiosity. Gazing in wonder at the little bundle she received from him, the young noblewoman asked with deep curiosity what was so special inside, blushing heavily. Elric explained that a good doctor needs to know medicinal plants, suggesting she try planting those seeds later on. Marie points her finger excitedly as she connects the dots, asking if the things inside that little pouch were what she planted in the garden. Tyria smiles with her eyes closed, confirming that those beautiful flowers blooming in the secret garden are the ones that grew from the seeds he gave her. Marie lets out another squeal of excitement, wonderingly declaring that young Master Elric was actually an insanely romantic boy back in his childhood. Suddenly, their sweet moment of gossiping is cut short by the firm sound of polite knocks on the wooden bedroom door. Rhonda knocks on the door and asks if Marie is in there, noting that she is long overdue. Rhonda walks in annoyed and scolds Marie for not having delivered Tyria's tea, yet Tyria gives a sheepish smile and takes the blame, saying she was the one who kept Marie chatting. Rhonda reminds her that her mistress also needs to rest per doctor's orders, telling her to get into bed right away. Slightly embarrassed, Tyria obeys, pulling the sheet up over her face to go to sleep. Rhonda offers a polite bow and wishes her mistress a good night's sleep. Night sets over the massive manor, leaving the place completely quiet and still. Tyria sleeps peacefully in her soft bed after the exhausting day she had in her dream. She travels back to her childhood days, standing in front of their old hideout. The kids appear lying on the wooden floor of the cabin, resting after playing so much little Tyria's face turns bright red as she watches the boy sleeping beside her. She gently pats Elric's head, softly thanking him for the fun day they spent together. Looking closely at him, she decides in her heart that she truly wants to be his wife. The girl then gives a sweet kiss to Elric's cheek, promising to become his wife. Morning arrives at the manor, and the sun's rays begin to light up the gorgeous blue sky. Tyria wakes up, stretching in bed, blushing a bit as she recalls the dream she had. She gets up and walks decisively toward the door to start her day. Upon opening the door, she gets a jump scare running straight into Elric standing right in front of her. The young man turns completely red, awkwardly greeting her to wish her a good morning. He stretches awkwardly, asking if she would like to join him for morning tea. Tyria replies she would love to accept the invitation, but asks him to wait a bit since she is not dressed yet. Elric smiles with huge relief, telling her she can take all the time she needs to get dressed. Before closing the door, she says she would like to make a small request of him. With bright red cheeks, Tyria asks if he could start calling her his wife. The young man is left completely speechless, resting a hand on his head as he tries to process the request. He breaks into a tender smile, replying that he will be waiting for his dear wife. Tyria beams with happiness, joyfully agreeing to his sweet response. Shortly after, 2 piping hot cups of tea are served on the table for the couple. Elric asks if his wife usually reads the newspaper, and she explains she needs to keep an eye on global news. She notes with concern that the nation of Chabor ended up surrendering to the Western Empire. Elric thinks to himself that that was the place where he fought in the past as a mercenary. He suddenly leans in close, suggesting they read that news together up close. The young man grows thoughtful while reading about the fall of a place that held out for so long. The two suddenly realize how physically close they are and get extremely flustered. He quickly pulls back, apologizing for accidentally getting way too close. The couple remains in an awkward silence, avoiding eye contact with each other. Elric tries to play off his nervousness, but his face stays bright red. Tyria steals a side glance at him, feeling her heart beat significantly faster. She lets out a subtle little smile upon realizing her husband's cute reaction to the situation. Gathering her courage, Tyria slowly leans in toward him with her eyes closed. Elric is surprised by her move and lets himself get carried away by the romantic moment. All of a sudden, Marie bursts into the room shouting that the invitation to the royal banquet has arrived once again. The young man chokes terribly on his tea from the fright. While Tyria hides behind the newspaper, Marie looks at the two in total confusion, realizing she ended up walking in at a terrible time. Outside the manor, the sunny day carries on quietly without any further major surprises. Later on, the couple walks side by side through the elegant hallways of the massive residence. Elric examines the invitation letter with a smile, finding it amazing that they received it. Tyria says he is now a true noble, but the young man replies that he feels odd about it. He confesses his family took advantage of the situation to force her into agreeing to this arranged marriage. Tyria places a hand on her chest, saying there is one important thing she has not told him yet. Elric is left quite surprised and confused upon hearing that sudden statement from his wife. Tyria declares, blushing with embarrassment, that it was all out of her own free will and that the marriage was never unwanted. Elric asks if that means she actually wanted to marry him, and she shyly replies, yes. Super embarrassed, Tyria tells him to go get ready already, as the carriage ride to the palace will take days. Elric cuts her off, confused, asking if she was really planning on taking a carriage all the way to the palace. She turns back, utterly confused, asking how else they could possibly travel. A short while later, the two arrive at the Wiben train station, which is draped in winter snow. The couple waits on the platform, bundled up warmly as steam from the massive engine fills the air. Tyria looks on in awe, asking if that huge piece of iron really moves all on its own. She replies a bit bashfully that she has always done all her traveling by carriage. Elric smiles, telling her she will be blown away, as the train takes only a few hours to make the trip. He politely invites her into the train car, and she nods, still completely amazed. A train attendant approaches their compartment, politely asking if everything is all right. Elric reassures the man, saying everything is great and that it is simply his wife's first time on a train. He puts an arm around her affectionately to ease her mind, telling her she has nothing to fear with him by her side. Out of nowhere, the train lets out an extremely loud steam whistle as it rolls down the tracks. Tyria gets a massive fright from the deafening noise, shaking with fear inside the car. Desperate, she asks if they shouldn't just head back to the carriage, but he simply laughs, explaining it is just steam. The journey continues as the grand locomotive speeds along, cutting through the gorgeous, snow-covered plains. Elric catches his wife's attention, suggesting she take a look out the window for a second. Tyria pulls back the compartment curtain to see what is outside the train. She is mesmerized by the scenery outside, while Elric watches her with a warm smile. A breathtaking, bright, natural landscape stretches out before her amazed eyes. Tyria lets out a gasp of joy, taking in all that beauty with a massive smile on her face. Elric asks what she thinks, noting that the view is completely different from what you see in a carriage. She happily agrees with her husband, thanking him for letting her see something so incredible. All at once, the train attendant's voice catches Elric's attention again at the door. The man asks if he is Elric Portman, handing over a small box sent from the first-class cabin. Opening the small box, he finds a gleaming gold bullet resting on the velvet inside. He instantly realizes that is the exact same bullet that hit his knee, meaning the enemy is on board the train. Elric notices the number 103 engraved on the metal, deducing it must be a cabin number. He resolves to settle things fast and quietly, so his wife does not end up caught in the danger. He politely asks her to wait in the car for a moment, and she agrees without suspecting a thing. Elric strides down the train hallway with a serious, grim look on his face. He soon finds the door to VIP cabin number 103 indicated on the gold bullet. The young man takes a deep breath, gearing up for the worst before putting his hand on the doorknob. With a swift, firm motion, he turns the golden doorknob to barge into the room inside the cabin. He comes face to face with Edward White and his secretary Agnes waiting for him. Edward greets the young man, saying it has been a long time since they last saw each other. With a provocative smile, Edward asks if he should now address him by his new noble title. Refusing to waste time on small talk, Elric rapidly draws a sharp blade. He lunges forward with everything he has, throwing a lethal strike aimed straight at Edward's neck. However, Agnes reacts instantly, pointing her firearm directly at the intruder. His eyes flashing red, Elric manages to block and deflect the aim of her gun. Agnes tries to strike back, but Elric manages to press his knife right up against her throat. The bodyguard does not back down, prepping to draw another weapon hidden in her clothes. The two remain locked in an extremely tense and dangerous combat stance. Elric focuses all his attention on pinning the woman down, while she glares back at him with icy eyes. Seeing the dangerous situation spiral out of control, Edward starts frantically shouting for the two of them to stop. He orders Agnes to lower her weapon and show respect to the legendary sword demon, one of the strongest in the continent. Edward also asks Elric to pull the knife away from his secretary's neck, remarking that she is a dear friend and an elite shooter. He warns that even if Elric slit her throat right now, she would still manage to squeeze off 3 shots before taking her final breath. Elric takes in Edward's words with extreme gravity, coldly reading the situation with his red eyes. He imagines for a second what the clash would look like if he truly decided to attack and cut the mysterious woman's throat. But he realizes that even if he came out victorious, he would end up taking multiple point-blank gunshots in the process. The young man knows taking such severe injuries right now would be far too big a risk for his current plans. Elric concedes to his opponent's logic and decides to step back to avoid an unnecessary fight that would hurt both sides. With a quick movement, he pulls the blade away from the bodyguard's neck, who finally manages to catch a breath of relief. Elric sheathes his weapon and notes that it would just be a pointless fight with losses for both parties. Agnes quietly takes a few steps back, positioning herself once again beside her boss on the couch. Edward praises his smart choice, letting him know he will grant him exactly 30 minutes of his time to talk things out, with a menacing glare. Elric demands he explain within that time frame the real reason he lured him to that cabin. As the train keeps up its high-speed journey, the clock starts ticking fast on that decisive conversation. Edward gets straight to the point, saying it is high time for the legendary sword demon to retire from the battlefields for good. Elric questions if he pulled all this off just to say that, but Edward responds that mere rumors about his vanishing act are not enough. The chairman of the trade group reveals he wants an official retirement announcement coming directly from the warrior himself. Elric stays silent for a few moments, keeping a stoic expression while processing what he just heard. He replies that making a public announcement would be extremely difficult, given he accumulated plenty of enemies over his life. The young man adds that revealing his location would be an unnecessary risk, prompting Edward to think up another alternative. The businessman pops up excitedly from the couch, suggesting they sign an official mercenary contract between the two parties. Showing zero interest in the man's absurd proposal, Elric turns down the offer immediately and point blank. Edward lets out a sigh of frustration and sits back down on the couch. Upset by the swift and blunt rejection, he shifts his stance, asking with all seriousness what the feared Western Front represented to the warrior in the past. Edward reveals that to him, war is simply a massive, lucrative business, given the entire continent owes money to his group. He smiles, coldly explaining that the tide of battles directly dictates the movement and flow of all his immense wealth. Young Lord Portman keeps a neutral face, asking what all those business dealings have to do with his own life. The businessman explains he had absolute control over the conflict's finances, except for one single element that changed everything. He points firmly at Elric, stating that the legendary warrior was the sole unpredictable factor in that entire war. He asserts that Elric poses the single biggest threat to his group's business, which is precisely why he made that offer. The man gives a sly smile and presents the two final choices, demanding he either officially retire or come work for him. Elric crosses his arms with a firm, commanding posture, listening to the merchant's bold proposal without saying a word. The young man rejects both offers, but makes a solemn promise that the businessman will never see him fighting on the Western Front again. In a warning tone, Elric politely asks the Duke to never show his face in front of him again, nor try to contact him in any way. Leaving no room for further debate, the young man turns his back and calmly mentions he is taking his leave from the cabin. Edward takes on a deeply serious, grim tone, replying that it is best for everyone's safety that he truly holds up that promise. He adds that he takes his business just as seriously as Elric cares for the safety and life of his dear wife. The young man senses the clear threat hanging in the air, replying in a steady voice that he will make sure to keep the Duke's warning firmly in mind. He walks off with heavy steps while Edward suggests it is best neither of them ever has to pay a heavy price for a mistake down the road. Elric slams the cabin door with extreme force and irritation as he leaves, making his absolute displeasure with the whole conversation crystal clear. The moment the young man steps out, Edward completely drops his tough guy act, breaking into a cold sweat of sheer terror, calling out to his loyal secretary. With a comically desperate expression, the Duke sheepishly asks if she happened to bring any spare underwear. Meanwhile, at another point on the continent, the grand manor of the influential Nimrud family comes into view under a beautiful reddish sunset. A pair of hands wearing formal white gloves knocks politely on the carved wooden door of one of the rooms. The senior butler calls out for young Master Aman, who answers from inside in a rather rushed tone, asking him to hold on. The young blonde heir cracks the door open dressed in just a silk robe, his face beet red and wearing a disgusting smirk. The elderly staff member calmly explains he just returned after delivering the custom suit pattern to the official tailor right behind him. A young maid with her clothes completely disheveled apologizes in tears, drawing an annoyed look from the butler. The butler firmly reminds him he was forbidden from touching the maids, but the arrogant youth scoffs at the order with a cynical smile. He changes the subject, excitedly asking if the beautiful Tyria will be attending this year's imperial banquet, receiving confirmation from the butler. The young master lets out an evil laugh, ordering them to prepare an exceptionally strong special wine to welcome the lady. Ammon starts daydreaming out loud, picturing the moment Tyria finally falls right into his irresistible arms. The butler ruins the mood, informing him that her husband, Elric Portman, returned a few months ago, sending the youth into absolute shock. Furious, Ammon questions how he dares to return after vanishing for 10 years, and the butler mentions the couple is traveling together. Fuming with rage, he points a finger and commands the butler to track down Elric's whereabouts to start keeping close tabs on him. He asserts he needs to meet his rival in person, and the servant politely bows, accepting his master's order. With a look of pure hatred, the young man swears to himself he will prove to Elric that he is not worthy of standing beside Tyria. As night falls, the couple finally arrives at the main Portman residence, and Tyria notes how long he was away. Elric offers a gentle smile and agrees, recalling that as a child, he used to spend way more time on her lands than at his own home. The lady agrees, suggesting they head inside to rest. Closely accompanied by her caring husband, time flies by, and a starry night covers the massive, luxurious Portman family estate inside the house. A lovely classic painting showing Elric's parents looking young and smiling decorates one of the walls. Tyria finds her husband admiring the artwork, and he comments in surprise that he had never seen that beautiful painting before. She explains she retrieved his parents' portrait from the basement with her father-in-law's permission, thinking it was sad for such a lovely image to stay hidden. Surprised, Elric asks if his father really authorized that, and Tyria confirms he agreed after a brief initial surprise. The young man grows thoughtful, recalling his father used to be so strict he would not even let him bring up family matters in the past. Tyria reveals, her cheeks turning red, that her father-in-law even handed over the master bedroom so they could sleep together once he got back. Utterly embarrassed by the reveal, Elric slaps a hand over his face, apologizing for his father's unnecessary comment, trying to quickly change the subject. He says it is getting late and suggests his wife head off to rest in her room soon. Offering an awkward smile, the young man reassures her she does not need to worry, as he will spend the night in his old bachelor room. Tyria lets out a disappointed sigh, accepting his decision with a visibly crestfallen look over having to sleep alone. She wishes him a good night's sleep in a totally unenthusiastic tone, slowly walking away down the hallway under Elric's confused gaze. Already tucked into her massive bed, the young woman flops onto the mattress, dramatically lamenting her beloved husband's excessive shy nature. She reminisces about the sweet, bold moments they shared recently, wondering why he decided to get so distant all of a sudden right now. In her romantic imagination, she pictures Elric walking into the room looking dashing, suggesting the two share the same bed. In her mind, she would confidently reply that there is absolutely nothing wrong with a married couple sleeping close together. Snapping back to reality, she starts flailing on the bed, frustrated that he did not take the initiative she so desperately hoped for. Out of nowhere, a massive crashing noise coming from the hallway startles the young woman, making her realize the sound came from Elric's room. Deeply worried about what might have happened, Tyria dashes out in her nightgown toward her husband's room to see what went wrong. Upon arriving, the maids reveal that the old bed simply collapsed completely, leaving the young man sprawled out on the mattress right on the floor. Embarrassed, Elric apologizes for the noise, mentioning he will just sleep on the couch, but his wife cuts him off with determination in her voice. Her face turning completely red, Tyria decisively suggests they have no choice but to share the same room tonight.